Greetings all, and welcome to another Wu-Sabat Outformation class out of the UK. Today we are doing a class on natural law and the concept of true justice, and that is based on a Master Secret series, number 29, referred to as Mim'at in the Sabaic tongue, which basically means true justice. My name is Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, and I'm a student teacher of the Master Teacher, Dr. Malachi Z, York, and so we're bringing this class to you today. So we're going to do, let's say, a brief overview or introduction on the platform, and then move on to an introduction of who we are, talk a little bit about the science of Wu-Sabat for those maybe joining us for the first time, or those who may need a little bit of a reminder. And then we're going to get into the subject of true justice and look at a number of topics around that. So we'll probably cover the first half of this today. And then in 2 weeks' time, I think it's the 20th of September, we will then start to get into the 9 doctrines of the Houthi and talk a little bit about the maxims of Yaanuwn. So once we've covered these first 2 areas, warmed you up a little bit, then move on to maybe a little bit more complex detail in that regard. So, moving on. So welcome to those joining us on the Facebook platform. We are broadcasting from the Zoom platform. So there are some slight differences to the way the two operate. Obviously on Zoom, it's a fully interactive setup, and so you can ask questions either live or in writing. I'm going to take you through that shortly. Obviously, if you're on the Facebook platform or Facebook Live, then it's a view-only platform there. We're not monitoring the chats. If there are any questions that come out of that, either if you know somebody's in the Zoom platform, you can ask it for you. We're not monitoring that time. That may change future classes, but we're not monitoring the chat. We monitor it afterwards and pick up any questions after the seminar is over. Yeah, so just to be mindful of that. If you do want to, if you're on Facebook and you do want to register or come in on the Zoom platform, it takes less than 30 seconds to register. You need a name, email address, automatic approval, and then it brings you in to the class directly itself if you do want to join us to ask questions live in the platform itself. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just do a couple of checks. I'm assuming it's okay, but we always do that at these classes. So I'm just going to ask you just to vote and check that you can hear my voice over the background Om chant. Okay, so I'm just going to launch that poll now. So just simply answer yes or no, appropriate to the answer that you want to convey. I'll give you 1 minute to do that. Okay, so it seems the majority of you that is fine and the screen's working okay. So we're going to move on with the class. Just check. Nothing. Okay, excellent. So let's move on. Actually, let's not do that. Right, okay, so we're going to start off the class today with just a positive affirmation that we do in our culture of Wu-Sabat. It's called Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. So I'm going to say that in the Sabaic tongue first and then translate that for you all into English for full and proper understanding. Abdoe Kaleh Namazurat Wu Fakur Ameh Kasam Un Empa Fa'ut Anuki Jawef Pa Ashuk Empa Pa'ut Wu Kaleh Ashuk Kawun Jawef Neya Anuki Kasam Un Empa Pa'ut Wu Pa Pa'ut Kawun Kasam Un Emneya Anuki Wahu Ameh Pa Pa'ut Wu Pa Pa'ut Kawun Wahu Ameh Neya Nakuk Kadur Najo Ameh Kasam Un Empa Pa'ut Wu Habub Ameh Mushahas Un Nakuk Kadur Kawan Kaleh Pafef Nakuk Dayor Jawef Pa Pa'ut Ameh Waseh Ameh Dayarni Kawun Lake Bakoe Jawef Pa Pa'ut Anuki Abed Bin Afashni Pa Pa'ut Kawun Anuki Pa Pa'ut Kadur Nakuk Kadur Pa Pa'ut Amul Nakuk Amul. So let's just translate that into English for you. So we said, begin all prayers and thinking as a part of the all. And then said, I'm in the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am a part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all expanding, as long as my want is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is, I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So that was part of our culture, Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. That's a positive affirmation to start our class and us to connect with not only everybody on the call, but all of our people, respecting existence, respecting the fact that teamwork makes the dream work, and the fact that, so when we commence anything, we want to connect with our Salafu physical ancestry, as well as our etheric ancestry, into Father's Parnatharu. All of that is within all, or Pa'ut, within existence. So, if you join us for the Zoom platform on the first time, then you see your controls that you see there, audio settings to the left. So if you do have any issues or problems, that's what you need to go to and just see what you need to do there to figure out your audio settings. You have a chat section, and this is for any messages that are not questions. It could be feedback, it could be, say, you can't hear me properly, or you can't see the screen, whatever the case may be. Positive messages, feedback on the class, whatever it is. So you can put that in there. If it's not a question, put that in the chat facility and select panelists and all participants. That basically makes sure that everybody can see what the message is, so we don't get duplicate messages. Obviously, these options are not showing for you on Facebook. This is only in the Zoom platform itself. If you have a question, then there's two ways in which to ask questions. So you can raise your hand and come to me and ask me a question direct, verbally. If you choose to do that, then what happens is one of the facilitators will call your name, and then you'll get a message on your screen to unmute your microphone, which you need to then press in the affirmative. If you've dialed in, then you *9 to raise your hand, and then when at the appropriate time when called, *6 to unmute your phone, and then *6 to mute your phone again. So once we give you the power, so if you ask a question one time, we give you the power to unmute yourself, you've always got the ability to then mute or unmute yourself. So we just ask, if you can make sure that your phone is on mute, so you don't, or your device is on mute, so you don't interrupt the call. The other way to then ask a question is verbally. And so you can do that by putting a written question, typing a written question in the chat. And again, one of the facilitators will then ask that question on your behalf. If you may be a bit nervous or don't want to speak live, then they can do that on your behalf for you. So if you do at any point have any questions, please don't sit there in ignorance. Certainly if you're joining us for the first time, you've got questions, then feel free to ask them accordingly. Okay, periodically we may have poll questions, so recap quizzes, just to test your understanding of what's being conveyed in this class today. Luckily for you, you haven't got any poll questions today, but I will have some questions that I do need you to give some feedback on, so it requires you to be even more expressive maybe than you have been in the past. It's not multiple choice. So you can do that in the chat just to give feedback on the questions that I may ask. And if you're on Facebook, you can do that in the chat as well. We'll look at those, and say, after this session is finished today. Right, bear with me one moment. So when you're, coming into any kind of session, or you're, join any organization or interact with an organization, you should do a thorough research on who the founder was, what their belief system was, and certainly you should do that if you're picking up a book, so on and so forth. So these are the kind of new mindset, nine mindset characteristics that as a people we need to start to employ and also deploy in how we're taking in information in this day and time. So clearly, if you were on the quite long class that we did, I think a 4 or 5-parter, reflection and projection, we are open-minded. We do need to be open-minded in this day and time to receive new things that we may not have heard before, but we also have to deploy a controlled mind in this day and time, because we have invisible forces adverse to us on the external side, and then invisible forces internally inside of us, which we have to always be the one in control of our emotions and our decision making. And the more knowledge you have, or the more right knowledge you have, right knowledge leads to right wisdom, which leads to a right understanding, leads to a right overstanding, and leads to a state of sound right reasoning. Right thinking leads to right actions. And this is what we need to get back to in this day and time, as we break the spell and transform ourselves from a what back into a who again. And the person sent for us in this day and time to do that, and I'm saying it, but you need to research and check it out for yourself, is who we know as the master teacher. Yeah, and it's called a master teacher because he's a master at teaching. Understood? And our people in this day and time needed a cure or a medicine in this day and time that dealt with the mind first. Yeah, so nothing can be done right unless the mind is right. So the mind had to be cured first. As you are fully aware, some talk about this being the age of Aquarius, if you believe in those star signs, and that is the era of air or ether. Understood? So you're dealing with an information age, or you heard it called the information age, and so there's an info war taking place, so to speak, and so the mind had to be addressed first. We had preachers, we had great speakers maybe over the years, but we now needed somebody who could teach. And in this day and time, that was the factual information. The new spirituality for us is facts. Yeah, no more faith and belief, or step above faith and belief. We need factual information. So belief infers doubt. Knowing things gives you confidence. Understood? So we need to know things again. And these are the hallmarks or the characteristics of us being able to unify again. Unify mentally first, and then being strong enough as an individual to then come together and work with your fellow brothers and sisters who are obviously like-minded and likened by race, and anybody else who, if they accept and respect who we are as Sabaeans or Musbatu, then by all means they can join and with our family and so on and so forth. So in this day and time, our ancestors always, as I say, have to birth teachers amongst us. Some say incarnated masters, and that's done for a very specific reason. So that's done to enable them to learn our ways, and insofar as knowing exactly who we are, and then designing a doctrine that would then be sufficient to aid our transformation. As we get through these classes and we do with our ancestors, who obviously who are in etheric form, or that energy state, long, as I say, evoluted or grew out of that physical state over 9 billion years ago in this particular incarnation, then there is a gap between their thinking and our thinking raised in this environment. Understood? And so therefore one must learn what is necessary and needed for a people. You can't assume, obviously, otherwise the cure's not going to work, is it? So therefore some necessary work and preparation was done, I say, to prepare those teachers necessary to come in this day and time, I say, to be birthed amongst us. So we teach in Wu-Sabat that leaders are born, understood, as opposed to being made. Yeah, and in this day and time, this individual that you see on the screen, Mary Abba York, also known as Fatima Miriam, is the mother of Dr. Malachi Z York. So without her and her input in his design, he wouldn't be here. And that would be the same for all of who we consider to be great leaders or teachers that have come to try and aid in the reformation or transformation of our race, the Nagaru people, African peoples in this day and time. Understood? So you cannot negate the importance of the sacred feminine, female in this day and time, because no one's coming here unless by way of the womb of a woman, and that's nature's rules. Forgetting what the Bible myths, the Quranic myths, the Torah myths and legends in this day and time may have expressed and taught to the world. What we see in the reality of natural nature is that woman was first. Actual facts. Double X chromosome, understood, is greater than the XY chromosome. The lesser cannot give birth to the greater. Understood? And as was expressed previously in these classes, nature does not create. Nature creates the charger first, then it creates the phone. Understood? So you can't create the thing which the needs to be then supplemented and fed off of first, and then it's got nothing to power itself with, in a sense, or to sustain itself with. So in nature, mother first, then other. That's why you see the word mother is M, understood, and then other, because the other is the offspring from the original. M for mother. Understood? See the word M there, which also means of. It's also the symbol that they use to measure the mass of stars. Understood? You see it in masonry as MM or M&M. Understood? So mother is first. And so we give certainly great respect to Mary Abba Akran-York, one of our Muslafu now, one of our ancestors, to help us and guide us on the other side here in a royal clan mother attire, now here to help us, as I say, on the other side. And she gave birth to Dr. Malachi Z Kabina York Akran. As I say, all great leaders have a mother. We just don't celebrate it because particularly many of us raised on the monotheistic religions, the Anunnaki, obviously, who those texts and scriptures were copied from, were patriarchal in nature, and that then passed on down to the religions, obviously, that they had influence and gave birth to. Understood? So therefore, even though the Bible in the first book is called Genesis, which is, some say it's genealogy of Isis, they don't mention the women in the genealogy of the book. So that tells you right there and then the mindset of not only the authors of those books, but the imaginations of the people who wrote those books also. So if that's what you want to align yourself with, if that's what you want to compromise, if that's what you want to settle for, so be it. But in this day and time, the nature is saying change. Nature is saying reject that old time, you understand, their old time 6,000 year spell perception of the world and the environment, and embrace the new, which is coming from the old. And in this day and time, for us as Negroids or Nagaru people, that is the science of Wu-Sabat in this day and time, which is a feminine science. So, the Master Teacher's father, Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Hadi, born in 1922, and unfortunately was assassinated in 1970. A great individual from the Mahdi family or clan, the royal family out of Sudan. As I say, ties back, excuse me, Mahdi himself, his grandfather, as I say, ties into the Dongolawi tribe, and that's taken us all the way back, as I say, to those pre-dynastic tribes of Napata and Moro, or some say Moroi, I say Moro. And so that's going back to the original of who we are. So here we see a beautiful combination of genetics necessary, let's say, for the Panatharu to then utilize. There's the image of their family there, and the Sayyid Muhammad al-Mahdi of the Sudan there. You can look him up in history. The necessary configuration, let's say, to allow our ancestors to speak through this individual. In ancient Egypt, this was known as an Amun Nabab Reye Achakhtar. Understood? The Hindus say avatar, the Muslims say Ilah Mutajasid. So various different terms for a vehicle or a vessel that your ancestors used to speak through or to convey outformation to you, coming in the form of information, let's say, in order to transform you. Understood? You see in those words there, outform, yes, inform, and you see transform, all about the form of us, yeah, the shape of us. And we, unfortunately, in this day and time, have been living in the image and after the likeness of someone else. Understood? The Caucasian, the Mokasu, etc. There's all fancy terms now, othering, imposter syndrome, and these different types of psychological terms now that are being used in the negative to understand the conditions that we find ourselves in. However, it's unnatural for us, as I say, to emulate another race based on our DNA, based on our etheric design and configuration. Understood? And how can we become fulfill our potential, emulating somebody else, being second to somebody else, being under somebody else. Yeah, when we step out, overstood, when we stepped out of the womb, when we came out now, we were able to walk and we step outside, there's nothing between us and the sun. There's nothing between us and the air, overstood, unless the Mukasu tries to put something between us, like a water bill. Understand? Like a land tax bill. Understood? If they could charge us for sunlight, I'm sure they'd do that as well. Understood? But this is what happens. Understood? So there's nothing between us. We are the environment. We are natural nature. We are the planet. We are the sun. We are these things made up of that composition. And there's nothing between us. What's happened is our mind has been deadened by bad information and adverse spiritual attacks that we have been unaware of, and we find ourselves spellbound today until certainly the master teacher came in 1963, 1970 officially, and started to break this spell. So this is him at age 25, and in the first 30 years, or should I say up until from 1970 up until 1996, which was the coming in of the 8th seal, some refer to it as, which was called the Holy Tablets. He talked about being housed by a being by the name of El Khadir, known as the Green One. Understood? And so that was the one supporting, or one of our ancestors supporting, the writing of a significant number of books. So when you're talking about the master teacher, one of the things that he's known for is a prolific writer and teacher in terms of lectures and answering questions. Yeah, so look out for the catalogue if you're not familiar with that. But this is what he says of himself. It's for you to, we're not saying to you to believe it. You have to do your own research and checks. You judge a tree by the fruit it bears. Understood? But one thing one is to be cognizant of is what did the ancient Africans, how did they upgrade their knowledge? How did we grow as opposed to evolve to learn and learn great sciences and things of that nature? Was it just a matter of need and what the Mukasu today, or the white man, calls evolution, or were we taught? Do we have a different way of doing things relevant to our culture and our way of doing things? Now, once the spell was broken on the first half an hour, as this upgraded in teachings that was now to take place. So in the first half an hour, it was the mastery of the religious degrees, and then moving on into our stuff solely. The culture most and more familiar with in the world is the ancient Egyptians, but this science that unified us and enabled us to do great works that still have stood the test of time today was this science known as Wu-Sabat, dealing with factual information. And as if you had to give us a religious title, then we would be animists. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, as he's known as today, so he was housed by this being referred to as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, and we see an upgrade in those teachings from the year 2000 to now then introduce or take us into what is being referred to as actual facts and Partarak, and now even the master's secret. So an upgrade in now us leaving behind those old time perceptions of the Bible, Quran, and the Torah, what's referred to as the monotheistic religions, and then moving solely into our stuff, having gone through those, let's say, first 3 degrees, as they would say. It's now time for us to grow up and become 9 again. 360 degrees of the physical and 360 degrees of the spiritual or esoteric. So gives us 720 degrees, and the 7 plus 2, which we'll be familiar with, makes us 9 again, whole. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. We've covered it in previous classes, but it's just to emphasize the fact that, as I say, we've taken a long walk on a short path, and that means that, as I say, a lot of information is about to be conveyed to us in a very short period of time. And so it's important to understand the cycle of things. So when you look at the Dendora star map, many think it has 12 constellations, but in fact, we talk about 24 constellations, each one of those 12 having a positive and negative side. But they are symbolic, as I say, of one would argue 1,000 years or 1 hour, because the esoteric elders in our spiritual governance system, which sets the rules for our tribe, you would have 24 earthly elders, but you also have 24 esoteric or etheric elders governing at this time, I suppose, the growth of our people, seeing our transformation. And at the end of the 24,000 year cycle, which is 1 year to 1 land mile, so the circumference of the planet is around about 24,896 miles in circumference, and it increases and it expands and contracts like most things in nature. The doctrine of breathing, which we'll get into next class. So in that regard, the 19th elder, say, incarnates and becomes the 25th elder. So if you imagine, I think I said in the previous class, 24 seats around, representing, as I say, that cycle in time, each one of them having an hour each. The 25th will be like the spoke or the wheel in the center. So it allows those elders then to use that vehicle or vessel to convey the necessary information that we need in this day and time to aid our transformation. So 19 becomes 25th, and that's the being referred to as Yaanuwn. Maybe sound crazy, maybe sound like a science fiction movie, but this is what the white man, the Mukasu, he knows this already. So run up ahead of time to throw that doubt, understood, in your mind, throw that doubt out there, and you should be skeptical, understood, but skeptical to the point where you should be curious to check things out, because many of the things that he has told you stay away from, you find himself using it to rule. Yeah, using it to advance himself. So he's made Egypt look like a bad place, when we know Egypt is in Africa, even though many think it isn't, amazingly. Understood? And that culture, tell you to stay away from it subliminally in their monotheistic religions, make it seem like a bad place, while he spends billions of dollars researching, uncovering, digging up, studying, and saying all kind of manner of scientists are over there. And it's interesting that when they open certain tombs, certain technological advancements seem to be announced then in the media, understood? And he doesn't create anything. He only copies what he sees others do. He is the imitator of the races. He is not the creator. Despite what lies and mythology may be conveyed through the television, I should say, and the cinema, understood? He does not create. He imitates. Yeah. So, and then they tell you, well, about masonry and things of that nature, but yet, you know, all of the world seems to be run on the foundation of these particular organizations, all of which, if you do your research, comes out of ancient Egypt. So in that first half an hour, it was necessary for us to go through and master these various different religious degrees, each one of them having an esoteric aspect to them, and then all roads, as I say, walked back to ancient Africa. Yeah, all of these religions found themselves coming out of ancient Africa, and that their God claimed, to be from Egypt. But yet, necessarily, we don't have the records in ancient Africa of their mythological stories, say that they claim. So once again, they seem to use us to give them validity to their stories. All of that basically leads you to the understanding, into an understanding that basically the deities of the Bible are nothing more than, or the books of the Bible, I should say, are nothing more than copies of the Sumerian tablets, where, as I say, it goes into much greater detail on who is sitting in the various seats of the titles that are being conveyed in the Bible, not explained by the religious world. So Genesis chapter 1, they use the word God. Genesis chapter 2 is Lord. Genesis chapter Genesis chapter 2, it is Lord God. By the time you get down to Genesis chapter 4, it's Lord on its own. By the time you get down to Genesis chapter 14, then they're talking about the Most High. So all these different terminologies, everybody assuming, oh, it's the one God, the one amazing God. Yet, so in the Hebrew language or Aramaic language, it means something very different. Never teaching you how to interrogate the Bible, Quran, so on and so forth, Torah correctly by teaching you it in the original language so that you can discern its meaning. Always keeping you 3 degrees away from the truth so that you have a lower understanding, have to interpret those books through what you call a preacher, a vicar, priest, so on and so forth, never getting the understanding. But obviously, in this day and time, where your ancestors, the Panatharu, enabled the creation of the computer, which was originally designed to free up the woman who was trapped in the household and allow her to be connected world over. If you look at, seek out a book called The Lotus of Life, yes, that enabled the meek, they say the meek, isn't it? That enabled the meek now to go in to the etymology of certain words, that allowed the meek to go now into the Bible concordances, into the Arabic lexicons, and really understand what was being conveyed. Yeah, so not through the mind of a translator who, when certain things either they didn't know the answer or certain things they made them uncomfortable, understood, yeah, or they couldn't explain it well, then they give you their best interpretation or hide things because it doesn't match up with their belief systems. And so therefore, your ability to see the truth is then compromised. Yes, and then start making up things in English that do not apply in the languages that the books was translated from. Yeah, but as long as a person can say, I believe, then that's what it seems to be the case. That seems to be all right. Yeah, and then religiosity takes place. Religiosity is a concept in Wu-Sabat that says what happens is that people accept wrong information. They accept wrong information and then try to convince the next person of this wrong information. If the two of them now accept the wrong information, it makes the first person feel like they're right, because a lot of people are accepting wrong information. So if a lot of people believe something's wrong, it makes them feel like they're right. This is religiosity. It starts in religion, but it's like exclusive to that when we look around in the world around us. Yeah, it seems that not to be derogatory, but strippers and various other people want to, because of the moral judgment that came with that, if you into that, not into that, but now we can have superstars by this loose kind of imaging that we see being promoted as normal. You understand? There's no even hidden, there's no subtlety, there's no finesse, there's no grace, etc. to it. But we must accept that as being normal now, in the sand, because the shame of the original people who felt that shame now want to convince others that that's the right thing to do, and then make it feel like it's right. You know, same thing with drug dealers. We're supposed to now accept, understood, drug dealers as the new superheroes through the media. I'm not judging particularly whether the person's in drugs or not, but my point is, at one time we didn't judge that as a morally righteous profession in our culture because of the negativity associated with the outcomes that happens, particularly when dealing with illegal drugs, and not even the fact that what those drugs have an impact on the person that's being sold to. Understood. Now, who they learn that from? Well, it's kind of obvious who they learned it from, because in this society, and when we start looking at some stuff next week into Hootish doctrines, you're going to see that who you're being told is the bad guy, and then who we accepted, who is really the bad guy, is going to turn itself on its head. So in this society, we have this thing they seem to promote, which is going back to the two brothers you see on the screen, Inky and Enlil. We seem to have this concept of good evil and evil. So the crack dealer is seemingly evil, but the guy in the corner shop who sells cigarettes, that's good evil because it's legal. Both of them kill you. So we have these contradictions within the multiple choices within our society. So yes, we may look at the crack dealers and be, well, that person is the scum of the earth, as they would like you to believe, but doesn't Walmart or Asda sell more things to more people? You understand? If they're selling alcohol and cigarettes, well, who's the bigger drug dealer? So the way in which we look at the world, and when we start to apply reasoning of Wu-Sabat, has to change, because we have to get back in our mind, not looking at it through somebody else's mind, to see things as they are, for not necessarily for what they've been taught to us to be. Understood? So the mystery of the God that they told us about, they predict in Revelations 10 chapter 7 should be finished, and certainly if you've been following the master teacher since the 70s, myself coming from a Seventh-day Adventist background, it took years for that to be lifted off in many different ways. Even now today, we still believe that our spiritual advancement, technological advancement, or interaction with natural nature must somehow have some link to the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah in some way, shape, or form. It seems like we don't want to let that go. Understood? But if you're using sound right reasoning, the Sands people, who we all descend from, they didn't have no Bible. They don't know nothing about no Torah, those original Sands people. They certainly don't know anything about any Quran. So none of the things millions of years ago, seemingly, God was cool with all these different life forms living on the planet, not living under the rules of the monotheistic religion. But all of a sudden, 6,000 years ago, there was this massive change, and all of a sudden, we all must be, all of what took place before seemed to be erased and eradicated, and now we must, our mind was starting from this book, only 6,000 years old. Understood? And we get from this class, there's things on the planet, evidence on this planet that say debunk that. Yeah, so, and what we're finding is clearly that the information being conveyed in those books is not sufficient, as I say, for this modern era that we find ourselves in this day and time. So, Wu-Sabat is the way of life. Nisbatia, or you see there, Sabatuyi, is the language, and the people are known as Musbatu. Yes, the people that follow the science of Wu-Sabat are known as Musbatu, and we're referred to as Sabaeans. Some have known as previously as Nawapians, but we are known as Sabaeans in this day and time. And Wu-Sabat is our way of life, or our culture, our spiritual science. Yeah, so in previous classes, they've got on our YouTube channel. We can go into that in more detail. Yeah, this is definitely the second resurrection, as you see there, and the guidance necessary and needed for this day and time. Now, these tones, I'm not going to cover this in too much detail, because we are going to cover this in part 2 in more detail. But for F major, tone of the planet; A major, tone of the human body; C major, the tone of natural nature. So when they say new babies, first sound they make is A major, because the baby is remembering the sound of the Big Bang, or Big Bang as it was to microscopic entities as the sperm hits the ovum. And so that's a Big Bang to microscopic entities, and the baby is remembering that A major sound. So that's the tonation it makes to announce itself into the world of light. Here, this is a number of different symbols in our Safaf script, falsely called hieroglyphs by the Europeans. And I suppose you should use this almost as a test if we're you're doing these classes, or you're reading certain books in Wu-Sabat, to get to a point where you're able to read what this actually says and what it means. So this describes, without me getting into loads of detail, this describes how we got here. Yeah, so, and you should be able to, we're getting to a day and time where, if we think about it, when you look at the marvel of the works of the master teacher, and us embracing it from where we were, and people who didn't even want to ask a question and had to be taught how to question again. That's how dumbfounded we were. That's why those early books used to say, what and where is hell? understand? Who is Marcus Garvey? Who is Noble Drew Ali? The reason why I used to say that is because the book says, who's Noble Drew Ali? And then Master says, okay, I'll tell you. So he had to teach us how to ask questions because he wasn't questioning. Understood? And so asking questions now to be able, many now the young people now being able to read this stuff and express it and explain it in the Madrasu Tashrak. Some brothers and sisters are able to read this stuff now and break it down, shows the day and time that we're in and how far we are coming and transforming once again in and after the likeness of our ancestors as their Kharadu children, or their Kharadu Parnatharu church, Kharadu Parnatharu, children of the Parnatharu. So we're going back in the image and likeness of the who we are as opposed to the what. So this Amun Nabab Ra'akta Rayak Achachta, let's get that pronunciation right. Our story has to be renewed every, say, the round it up, the wise round it up, maybe 25,000 years, and say, feminine forces of nature birth these leaders from amongst us, and he comes to reveal the hidden past in order for us to change the present so we can take control again of our future destiny. Understood? Yeah, so we're going back to where we was at our best point in the past, understood, and then bring that into the now to take control of our future, understood, and no knowledge has been left to you. Now, obviously, there are so many things that happen within the multiverses, it would be impossible, seemingly, to teach and acquire all of that knowledge. So you're learning what is relevant to our species, our development as a people, where we came from. So we're coming from the original sources and forces that grew the universes, understood, even before then. So back into that darkness that you see up in the so-called night sky, even though it should be called shadow, because the word night means absence of light. The sun is always shining, so we're in a state of shadow. But that's where we're coming from, that blackness, dark matter, dark energy, basic energy before we have energy, that state. So it starts with, as I say, the feminine forces first. So the knowledge tests, and the reason why you see us trying to give you a multimedia type experience is because now hakakat, or actual facts, stood a step above, I suppose, what was conveyed originally in the Holy Tablets. Knowledge test was evidence, experience, and reasoning, and now moving on to actual facts in the new cycle, information. And so giving to that into various forms so that you can seek what we could consider to be confirmation, yes, then to reveal what a thing is. Because as Sabaeans, we want to be, or should be striving to be, ontologists. So we're looking or interested in the essence of a thing, the root of it, to know what it really is. We are factologists, so we do it with facts, and numerologists as it pertains to our culture. So we're interested in the science of numbers and the patterns that are conveyed within nature. So we're looking for those patterns. Those patterns can oftentimes give us the opportunity to learn and confirm things, although we might not physically be there, and that's our reasoning skills and abilities. So you see the 6 knowledge questions, but one then moves on to proof, confirmation, and then looking to reveal. So because we're interested in the who, not the what that was created or what we accepted, as you see previously, by nature. Being in this society, we've accepted, say, many different things, decisions, for the purposes of survival, but that's created a differential, a natural differential between who we are and, and what we, who we are according to a natural design, what we're supposed to be by DNA, interacting with this environment, what our ancestors intended us to grow into, because they're the ones who seeded life here and therefore knew the formula contained within the egg or the first cell here and what it had the potential to grow into. So that is our who, which is, say, it's been manipulated for us to become some hybrid of what we're not supposed to be as a what, mainly through, as I say, certainly in the last 6,000 years, but more acutely in the last 400 years with the various different kidnappings of our people, falsely called slave trade, although nothing was traded. So Wu-Sabat is, if it had to define it, I suppose it's a lack of definition really, but it would be considered to be animism. Yeah, and so that's the viewpoint. The Sabaic word for religion is sa'am, but it translates as opinion. So our viewpoint is that we descended from a soul force first. We descend from an energy state first before we materialize into the physical. The body that we are in right now is referred to as a skin suit and a mechanism for us to interact with the physical. It's still us, one of our 9 principles, but we recognize that we came from a soul force first, which is linked to our mental. So that referred to us as animists. If you look at this table here, it gives the age of various different religions and their origin here on the planet Earth. So Wu-Sabat certainly, say 24 equinoxes past and well over 500,000 years old. Its origin from Orion. And when we talk about Fahuti, when we talk about Amun and these different types of characters, these are blood descendants and blood relatives. Yeah, if we consider through the mitochondrial DNA all the way down, that soul seed going back, yeah, we had a mother and father, we had a mother and father, so on and so forth. When we're talking about them, we're not talking about myth and legend, we're talking about our DNA ancestors. We are extraterrestrial in origin, as noted by our hair texture, because we are the only people on the planet with hair. Everybody else, as you are aware, has fur, just like the other animals. Understood? So, Fahuti, from the Sirius star constellation, let's say, when incarnated on Earth, landed, as it's expressed in there, called in our city of Hermopolis. At one time, the gods, and even today, the gods and their children walked together. So this was our culture, our religion, and as I say, many of their educational systems and sources of knowledge today coming from ancient Greece, which they consider to be maybe the higher aspects or high points of Mokassa or Caucasian civilization, as they would have it. Today, they were taught and schooled under us in ancient Africa, in ancient Egypt. So the question is, what is the African or the Tamarian or Egyptian definition of that thinking and doctrines that they were then teaching? Because obviously if we have it from a Roman and Greek interpretation, then that's not the original. And obviously many things then get missed in translation. Now, when we look at the evolution of religions on the planet today, interesting enough, we see animism, Hinduism as the next oldest, as they would classify today, and then we see Zoroastrianism, and out of Persia. Many don't know that actually this has had a heavy influence on many of the religions today, because this was dealing with sun or fire worship, let's be said, sun appreciation or sun worship, certainly a central part of our culture, but the worship of fire is aligning them with certain characters out of the Anunnaki clan, so to speak, one in particular being Nana, whose name means master of fire. He's your person they speak about in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12, Ezekiel chapter 28, as well as Revelation chapter 22 verse 16. They worship today. So and that goes back to let's say this individual named Zoroaster, who, as I say, Abraham, even himself as a Chaldean, according to their story, according to their story, was a Chaldean, and they worshipped a sun deity by the name of Ahura Mazda, well before he converted, according to their story or legend, to the oneness of the Most High, being taught by a being by the name of Melchizedek. Understood? So Ahura Mazda, let's say, is the one who taught this fire worship. And actually, if you look at the monotheistic religions today, when they talk about the Most High, what they're really talking about is the sun. Yeah, and, many books were written by the master. Jesus found in Egypt, Luciferian conspiracy, the beginning, that really just uncovered this in great detail so that you could see how certain things were played out. And Lost Records of Time, actual fact, also goes in so that you can understand how the confusion came in. Yeah, how, as I say, many of the stories, we say this all the time, but as I say, unless you do the research, you won't find out the confirmation. Maybe we need to do even a class of Lost Records of Time, revisited, and bring that back again. But how the confusion came in, where, as I say, these monotheistic religions, where we named planets, where we named constellations in our culture after people who had significant influence in our lives, so they would be well remembered, understood, but we knew that they were people named after, or constellations named after people. The Sumerians came along, and the Anunnaki started to name, in their stories, they named planets after people, understood? Say, somewhere along the line, according to their story, when the so-called Jews were in bondage, the Israelites were in bondage to the Babylonians, they now misinterpreted that and then started to think that those planets, the people that were named after planets, were actually physical people. And so in their stories, you see Ishmael having 12, and his partner having 12 sons and one daughter. Jesus has 12 disciples. Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. He also has 12 sons. You understand? And so a very coincidence, women were giving birth to 12 sons at this time. No, it's talking about star constellations, it's talking about planets and various different things. The movement or cosmology, as you would have it today, misinterpreted, as I say, and being watered down and given back to you as monotheistic religions. Yeah, all of it, though, relating back or seeking to have you worship fire. That fire that they're making reference to is Nana. You understand? And almost the whole planet has been changed from moving for where intelligence and intelligence comes from, which is the darkness, understood, and now we have associated knowledge and intelligence with light. You understand? And in ancient Egypt, light is chaos. So the darkness is balancement, peace, obviously tranquility, supreme balancement is the blackness, as we see, dominated by our existence. And interesting enough, let me just go back. Interesting enough, you see Wiccanism and Druidism, and this is not talked about a lot specifically, because what's happening is that, again, when you look at this list, we don't get down to sort of Christianity, Jewishism or Judaism, to a lot later down the line. So these religions have been influenced, by stuff that's come well before them. And Wiccanism is the real religion of the Celtics. It's the real culture of the Mukasu or the Caucasians. Yeah, Wicca, understood? Even their version of Masonry is more based upon, they try to allude to ancient Egypt and ancient Africa, but in actuality, when you really look into it in some detail, you see it goes back to Druidic teachings. Yeah, Druidic teachings was uncovered in books referred to as the Millennium Scroll Part 1 and 2. Understood? And so this is really important to understand, because what you're seeing is the watered down version of this Wicca science that our people don't know was originally cast, or it was the witches and warlocks of the Wicca tradition that helped to cast a spell on our people that we are, as I say, suffering from still in this day and time. And it's finally woven into the various different myths that over time, whether you say you're in with it or not, it's very difficult. You've certainly got kids, living in your own land and your own society. You understand? Black people used to be afraid of Halloween. Now, with the Halloween dons now, you understand? Halloween kings and queens dressing up our kids in all kind of things. So because under the guise of, I didn't have this when I was a kid, so I feel guilty, so I've got to make my children now fit in because I don't want to not make them be outcasts in school, so on and so forth. So we have them subliminally, say, following these Wicca traditions. You see here a picture of the Pope and Santa Claus. They're wearing exactly the same outfits. You understand? The Pope is supposed to be a Christian, yet he wears a yarmulke, like Jewish people wear a yarmulke. These are all things to have a think about. Yeah, they really separate the way they keep conveying that to the world. And this shows you a comparison between the Christian holidays and how they align themselves with Wiccan holidays. Wiccan may be the more extreme spiritually of the two, but at least they get a watered down version of these different religions today, which some may call witchcraft and all that kind of stuff, but what nicely interwoven. It has a different face today, but still has people putting their emotional energy into it and not really know what they're doing. And just because it's been around for a long time, it's become accepted truth, but it's not actual truth or actual facts. So animism and the science of Wu-Sabat clearly has various different definitions, which we're touching upon today. I'm just throwing a few up so that you can just be clear about what we're stepping into to do with natural law class today. So really, when you're dealing with Wu-Sabat, we're talking about natural nature or natural science, let's say, within the universe of things. Now, for our understanding, or to help us out here and to make things clear, nature is a reactive system. Understood? So when various different universes were created, and when this universe, we'll speak about this one, was created, your ancestors, the Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, come on to talk about them a little bit more, where the English word nature comes from, put a system in place, obviously, to govern the environment, because that's what they're responsible for. They manage the expansion and contraction within existence of various different universes, which come from dual verses, triverses, multiverses, omniverses, which is what we say for everything. Now, in managing that, they put a set of rules in place that govern the environment. And so that is what you're referring to when you say nature. Understood? Because these rules are in place and they, I suppose, make the environment self-sufficient. Yeah, and it's not based upon this idea of what we perceive to be good and bad, moral judgments, so on and so forth. It is a set of rules that work, very complex set of rules, highly advanced, highly intelligent set of rules that make the environment self-sufficient. Understood? And it's a reactive state. And what happens is that the world, or certainly the Western world, has confused that this nature state or reactive state with what they're calling God. So this environment and certain things that human beings are doing within the environment may trigger certain aspects of these rules, whether it's in that person's existing lifetime or things that have happened prior to that person living. We've triggered certain rules in the environment, which has led to certain consequences. And then things happen, and the question is, well, why is God allowing certain people to live and babies, for example, innocent babies, to die, while allowing, understood, some criminals or whatever, or rapists or whatever to live, while other people are getting sick, who may be much more deserving, as you would see it, as living. And basically that is because man has put his own interpretation, his own imagination on that which, as I say, is within existence and nature. Because I say, when we're looking at these books, is the imagination of, let's be honest, European males. That's what we're reading about, and that's our interpretation of what we're calling the divine. But these rules are in place to manage the environment, and part of us learning back who we are again in terms of Wu-Sabat is understanding how these rules work. Understood? So that then helps us not to be victims victims through ignorance, not to be victims through ignorant behavior, not to be victims because we've got no strategy of how we need to behave and act when we're on the come up. So we're a people that have obviously lost our connection, or had lost our connection, has now been restored at least, lost our connection to our ancestors. Yeah? And for the majority of us, we're not directing our emotion, I'm talking about from a race perspective, not necessarily the people on the call, but from a race perspective, we haven't been directing our emotional energy to our own ancestors, and by way of our genetic and then etheric line, thus connected. So therefore, much of our energy and much of our emotional energy has been diverted to feed others of other races, understood? And this is obviously unnatural. So nature is a set of rules and systems that trigger, and we've given many examples before, as I say, if, and you know this because, as I say, if there was gas in a room, a gas leak, and there was, I don't know, some babies or whatever, or some kids in a nursery or whatever the case may be, and the necessary things, so somebody lit a spark, for example, then that triggers those rules for ignition. Therefore, the place is going to blow up. The system is not designed where there's some judgment in there that says, no, in this situation, don't create a fire. In that situation, don't create this. In that situation, don't create this. There's no judgment in there. It's a reactive state. And so to say, people have made that synonymous with what they believe is God or some force or power that's seemingly watching over everything, when it doesn't work that way. So the reason why it says natural nature, because we acknowledge the fact that our ancestors who created that environment are obviously supreme beings. So supreme, as we are supreme beings, we are above that system. At one time in our right mind, we were above that system. We were here before it was even created. That's how far we go back. Yeah. So understanding how that's programmed and how it works, understood? Because if something is then within the rules of that system and complements it and works by and acknowledges and accepts those rules, then that is considered to be natural. If something is working against those rules, then that may be considered to be unnatural. The same like when you go to a supermarket, you can buy organic carrots, understood, because they've been grown a certain way, etc. And the people who manage the definition of what organic is, you can apply for a classification and say, hey, this is organic carrots, as opposed to every other carrots that are not organic. Yeah, so we don't use the term unnatural, but the question is, well, what's a carrot that's not organic? We just say carrot. You understand? But if one is grown in the most natural way, then what's the other carrot? You know, is it? We don't say artificial carrot, but in Wu-Sabat we say, okay, well, that's unnatural. You understand? If it's not followed a certain pattern of growth. Understood? And we have many things in this society today which are unnatural because they go against the natural order of things, like seedless grapes. It's hard even to get grapes with seeds in now. Grapes back in the day used to have seeds, and all of a sudden they want to create seedless grapes for some reason. Obviously, the seed in the grape, when you spit it out or whatever, it's defecated or whatever, it continues the cycle of life. Understood? So more grapes can be grown, so on and so forth. Yeah, but if you've got seedless grapes, that is the end of that particular line of item. And obviously, if you're taking in seedless foods, guess what's going to happen to your seed? You become seedless. Yeah. So there's some forces in nature that are designed to promote death, decay, chaos, disorder, and there are opposing forces that keep things in order and about creation and growth. And this is our understanding when we're getting back into the nine knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding to overstanding, on into sound right reasoning. So ontologist animus, the supernatural, is to say that the very natural, not spookism, is natural nature, its highest and lowest points in existence. So our rules are based on nature's rules. Yeah, that is our culture. Our culture is alignment with natural nature. Understood? And super means close. You understand? And so, the more in line we are with that, the closer we are to what we are, because we are, as I say, nature's children, and that's what we represent in nature. How far we have fallen, we are supposed to be that judge and regulation and the standard by which things are judged by, because nature gave us the strongest genetics, understood, for the environment that we're in, and it also put the best available natural resources and placed us on the best part of the planet. So despite what we were taught and made to feel lesser in school, because we were taught lessons which made us feel lesser, or lessened our abilities in their school system, nature endowed us with the greatest gifts. Despite what the Mickey taking, racism, so on and so forth, that many people endured as children, and it has some adverse impact when they carry it over into their adulthood, nature gave you the best if you really observe, or your eyes now start to open and see what we've been really gifted with. Yeah. So 118. So in fact, supernatural in Wu-Sabat means the higher or highest Sachem power. The black power is called Chamem Sha'ad. Yeah, black magic of the natural nature of nature, not something of white powers called Sha'ad, white magic. Understood? So black magic is when nature works for you and you are black. It's nothing to do with cutting the necks of chickens and align yourself to beings that, as I say, will give you things for blood sacrifices. Black magic is when nature works for you and you are black. Yeah. So independence since June 1992. Unfortunately, the maths teacher, we protest and confirmed his innocence through facts, and we know that, as I say, many of the great leaders, even the ones we've shown, the 7 there, have had terrible endings, some killed, murdered, defamed, and in this day and time, they do not want you to receive this information, do not want you to receive the truth, because they perceive that you leaving them, understood, or us coming back to power is their ending, understood. And as we get through these classes, these 2 parts today, you'll find out their ending's got nothing to do with us. Yes, and their time to expire is to do with their own doing, understood, and to do with them and their ancestors, got nothing to do with us, even though they like to point the blame and use us as their scapegoat, which we now need to stop being that for them in this day and time by fully, as I say, taking back control of our powers, understood, and that starts with dealing with the mind in the first instance. Yeah, so our ability to be autonomous was announced to the world in June 26, 1992, and that's what you have to do. You have to announce it or make it known to the world, and this will continue to develop in this day and time. So we had Tamaray, 476 acres in Georgia, which would have been fantastic now, how that would have been developed in this day and time. But COINTELPRO, one would argue, put a stop to that. It was a land grab, but that doesn't stop the necessity and need for us to get our land back. Without a land, we're not a nation. So we have our language, we have our culture, but without our land, we're not a nation. So we remain in our tribal status until we obtain or get our land back again, which we've got some in Trinidad, but others need to be acquired around the world to get us back to our where we were again, and that's centralized on freeing the master teacher. There's still more for him to convey and more for him to do. That being the Aman Nabira Akata sits in the seat until he's 80 years old, and let's hope he's able to do that for many more years beyond that. So, touching upon a number of different racial subjects today. And so, as we say, no one wins a race in racism, which is, I think, very apt in this day and time. However, we also say that it's not about racism, it's about race unity. So for those who respect us as we respect them for who and what they are, then we can unify. We see, obviously, with the Black Lives Matter movement, whether you agree with the political aspect of it or not, but the principle of it is that many races came out there of different types to protest against the injustice and the type of world that is being, as I say, the system for many years upheld until obviously this virus slowed everybody down. And let's say the phone camera has been the witness to many of the injustices that have taken place. I know many people, even on this call right now, a level where it's hard to even watch or even take these things anymore. So hopefully Wu-Sabat, what you're reading about and finding ways to say, think positively, rise above these issues, keeps you on an even keel. Because we know how racism is. Racism is cumulative, certainly cumulative. So when one event happens to you in your life, you start to remind you of everything else that took place that we had to park. And one of the things you'll understand about this is because a lot of the time what happens is we're not receiving true justice. Yeah, we're not receiving a resolution for these issues, according to nature. And so we've been stacking up these things, and we don't have a scapegoat that we use to pass off all of our adverse behaviors onto. And so we've been carrying all of this. And so when these various different incidents happen, you have to be careful because, as I say, it can open up this doorway where you've parked up all of these various different incidents and parked them up, reverse parked them into this multi-story car park of BS, where you've got all these incidents that take place, and you've never really got justice for none of it. Understood? So definitely have to keep a positive mind frame in this day and time. Build up that psychic self-defense we spoke about in reflection and projection to be able to navigate through. So don't find yourself, you're not going to be able to take it. Don't find yourself watching these videos. Necessary, you can still be involved in the fight for justice. But if it's not you, don't find yourself putting your mind at risk, just because we've seen desensitized to violence from various different TV programs. When it's seeing it in our own race and seeing it so cold-blooded in front of us, it is going to have an adverse impact. It is going to have an adverse impact. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful of that to mind your own mental health without being so disconnected that you don't care. Right. So, in fact, let's move on. So in previous times, we've gone through these various different sections. So, I'll just touch on a few more before we get into the detail of the class today. Now, very important, this particular slide. So one of the things that you understand is when we talk about information, information is particularly dealing with things that take place on this planet. So information keeps you in a certain type of formation. Yes, we deal with outformation. Outformation is dealing with stuff that's outside of the planet. Obviously coming here or in, when it comes here, it becomes information. And then when you talk about beneath the seas, remember 71% of this planet is water. We talk about beneath formation. So you've got various different ways in which what we would call knowledge or what we receive can influence the way we see things. You even have an impact on the shape of our being, physically and esoterically. So in doctrinators, you see there links to the word phonetically, links to the word endocrine in the sound. And as you see, your glands secrete secrets. They secrete information into the bloodstream by way of hormones. And so what we take in has an impact on us physically. Yes, and that's why it's called information, keeping you in a certain formation. So we have to take control of that and start to shape ourselves. The new cycle information is designed to create a new being. Remember, at one time, blacks, because when we aligned ourselves with the Sudanese side of our culture, we were referred to as Nubian, which was symbolically saying new being. So a new being in this day and time, which Wu-Sabat is designed to create. That's why oftentimes they refer to you as the children of the Natharu, or even the Master Teacher refers to us, his children, not because of some egotistical thing. It's saying because the new cycle information birthed a new mindset in this day and time, as it was ordered by natural nature, and continues to be upgraded with the impact of the golden children, let's say, born between 1973 and 2003, which touched upon in the last class, designed to intercept the genome and then raise us up to a higher vibration. So the planet at the moment is going through its own dimensional shift and moving to a vibration of 7, 8, and 9 ether, which will always be of our ancestry. And the Caucasian can only vibrate up to 6 ether. Understood? So unfortunately for him, there's no place in the next level of evolutionary cycle. And if we continue to follow after his ways and fashion after his ways, then his fate will be our fate. So the science that sits behind, or the etheric science that sits behind them, as called Zupu, yes, the science of religion. Yeah, so you seem to be more familiar with the art of religion, but sitting behind it, i.e. its purpose, is the science of it. Interference of the dead into the lives of the living. So you sit with that for a minute. So the dead are those negative forces in nature who must oppress, suppress, repress in order to depress and subsist on living substances in order to survive. So a parasitical nature. So the whole part of their nature, what they follow spiritually, is designed to say for them to direct energy towards their ghostational forces and keep them fed, using the forces that cause things to decay, including death. So the more death, the more 6 ether, or the power of Zupu, you understand, becomes stronger, which is one of the reasons why, which we didn't do in ancient Africa, they bury their dead in cities. And they bury their dead, they don't burn their dead. Yeah, so one of the things is of burying or burning bodies is because it stops the transmission of diseases and bacteria that arise from the dead, which is why we carefully used to remove any organs that would liquefy, understood? Yeah, and then pack them out with spices, salts, and so forth to dry out the body, so no liquid could form for hygienic reasons. Yeah, but they bury the dead in cities, understood? Well, what do you think is going to happen when all this stuff starts to decay? That bacteria and all those stuff comes into it simply rises into the atmosphere, and we breathe it in, understood? And so it has an adverse impact on the societies that we live in, because they build in cemeteries right in and around where people, as I say, live. But this is part of the culture that supports that, because they know why they're doing it for. Yeah, and we see them touching, in this particular instance, he's touching sort of key pulse point, or wants to try and get close to the pulse point, or bring him in. In fact, not his pulse point, wants to bring him in so that she can suck in some of that breath, the sahum, the power, or some of the vitalities that he's breathing out in this instance. So obviously, if you're not of that particular persuasion, you don't know how what you give off then makes them feel in that regard. So people want to get up all in your face and take your breath. Obviously, maybe less so now because coronavirus and everybody's masked up, and so maybe in that instance it's a good thing, because people can keep their distance and not steal your breath. Right, so these forces, opposing forces in Wu-Sabat, are coming from 2 extraterrestrial origins. So for ourselves as Negroids or Nagaru, that is the Muntharu, or the overseers. We say overseers to give a visual picture of what you're talking about there. We would say they are suns. Yes, the sun you see 93 million miles away, and there are many different stars you say are out there. That is a depiction of the Muntharu, or the overseers. And then the Caucasoids, origin really goes back to the Anunnaki and the Muhammatu, or the Pleiadians, understood? So you find them mentioned in Job chapter 9, verse 9. Remember, there's 100 million stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone. Obviously, why have they just mentioned those few star systems or constellations, well, that's because those are where the extraterrestrials that influence the religions came from, and obviously ties into their ancestry. And only through mixing it crosses over into ours. So we talk about the relationship between the moon and the sun, insofar as understanding some of the nature of these things and how it patterns itself in a similar way and how things take place here on Earth. So if we're the terrestrial representation of the sun, which we are in our culture, then others must reflect other cosmological aspects, because obviously we've came from the heavens and descended down, so to speak, or come from that energy or gaseous state and descended down to become more material. So we understand that the moon has no light of its own. It gets its light from the sun. And so we look at these secret orders and we think about the frequency of Wu-Sabat. It is a frequency, and we're receiving this outformation coming to us in the form of information. Then there are forces designed to seek to block that, even if it's only temporarily, or make the signal, as I say, have a lot of white noise in it, so you don't get the purity of what it's designed to be. And so there's always matching forces. So if we've got 24 elders that are dealing with order and growth of the universe, then there's a 24 counter here that's trying to block that. Understood? And this is what this is touching upon. And this was a symbolic representation of this planet, as it's known to certain groups of extraterrestrials as the farm. Understood? So many human beings as well as animals are considered to be food sources, hence why you're called consumers, or we are called consumers, not separating myself from the group. You see these different 9 rays trying to enter in to us. Obviously here sector 24, and being blocked by what we see taking place there. So this is what we find ourselves, Wu-Sabat as a frequency, and how we have to raise up our vibration to be able to receive that outformation that we know will guide us to do the right things in this day and time. So last slide, and I'll jump onto the new stuff we're doing. So we talk about the spell, Rakai Shalel Nawum, the spell of sleep, as it's called in this day and time, the spell of ignorance, and it has different iterations throughout his story and our story. But certainly, as I say, it was cast by those witches and wizards of the Wicca religion, understood, whereby it is, as I say, seen where it causes us to see things but we don't see them, hear things that we don't hear them. So we've been under a spell for some time, which has been enhanced with the language. One moment, let me just show some nice in the background. 1 second. Right, I'm back. So simple things like that for maybe join us for the first time. When you think about the word one, yeah, in English you would spell it O-N-E, understood, but is it spelled W-O-N? Which one is the one? So if you was going phonetically by the language, isn't it? One would be W-O-N. So the one that's O-N-E is not one, is it? It says something else by the rules of the language. So they get you to accept wrong information, but call it proper way to say it or the proper way to spell it. Understood? So that's getting you to accept wrong information, but call it right. And this is where it starts from in the language. And obviously we become facilitators of that as parents, because we're teaching our children those rules. And so it's like, obviously, when you get to the letter C, and then even the letters in the alphabet don't have unique sounds. Yeah. Okay, let me move on. Any questions?
No questions here so far.
No questions from myself, really.
All right, it's a bit of a long introduction, but no matter. So, A few maxims from Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. So if you won't drink poison, then don't listen to fools. I think that's a good one. Thank nature for being there when you need it. So we're talking about a lot about nature in these two parts. Interesting one. To accept a race is to accept their curse and judgment for their evils. Food for thought, that one. So let's explore that in a bit more detail. So we talked about Parnatharu being sons, so at least have that kind of visualization when you are thinking about that. And say this before, but I'll say it again. So suns are planets with a brain and a blood system. Yeah, so there is intelligence there, just like ourselves. They're not inanimate objects. Yeah, they have thoughts, feelings, and make decisions, so on and so forth. You understand? So the manifestation of Parnatharu in the Safaf script was shown as 3 flags, and you see it's central to our culture. Yeah, so you have to gain that understanding. You can see here Outformation being conveyed, isn't it? Yeah, from one source there, particularly see the Atum source, but being conveyed there. Some of those carrying unks, yeah, so carrying life, but obviously these are carrying other types of outformation coming to us in the form of information. Excuse me. And the number represented, so the perfect number when you're dealing with the races, or what they refer to as perfect unity, is the number 1,000. Yeah, so the Nagaru is 999 out of 1,000. The Mongoloid would be 666, or the Dravidian would be 666 as well out of the 1,000, and the Caucasoid is 333 out of the 1,000, which is the perfect number. All those numbers symbolically are designed to represent brain capacity, understood, yeah, within nature. So we can see here the 3 zeros, those three beings necessary for existence, yet space, matter, and time. Now, when we look at this prayer, I've shown this before, but it's interesting just to look at some of the wording here. So it says, "O ancient ones, guard us. You all from whom birthed our ancestors." Yeah, so who we call Salafu, yeah, our ancestors. You're 30. You make 30, but you're 29 other relatives within your bloodstream. Yeah, you're 4 generations. So that's your Salafu. So you're using your relatives to connect with any beings necessary that came before. Now your relatives, your blood relatives within your DNA and RNA, your Salafu, say they're designed to help you out with things that are taking place that are personal to you. You understand? Like whatever, you got bailiffs at the door, or you need help with a certain bill, or whatever the case may be. That's who you'd put your request to. The Parnatharu, your higher ancestors, are not interested in the personal intricacies of your life. They're interested when you then start to put your life in service for the betterment of others. Understood? And when you do that, then the universe starts to reward you by assisting you. So in service to others. You've got 2 forces at work that are designed to assist and help us. When we understand this system correctly, then we can direct our emotional energy to get us help in the life that we're living, certainly from our Salafu, who know or have some understanding of what it's like to be, or closer to an understanding of what it was like to live in the physical and obviously on their own continued ascension pathway. But part of that is to support us. The problem's been is that we've not been calling or dialing their telephone number for their assistance. We've been calling everybody else's name other than that of our own family to offer that support, because as I say, they, through bad information, made it negative, isn't it? Black magic was made negative rather than, as I say, it being a fundamental part of our ancient culture, understood, and how we connect into natural nature. And so speaking to our ancestors as easy as now using a mobile phone and dialing a certain telephone number for assistance that we need. So we need to start reconnecting with that as an important part of our progression and transformation. So it says, "You all whom birthed our ancestors and our families, and from whom are fashioned into soul." Yeah. It says, from whom were spirits. So they were spirits, but are no longer. From whom are ether. So this is telling you what they are now, as opposed to what they were before. From whom were flesh and blood. So the source of what we are today comes from ether. We'll see the three higher principles there. The achach, the ba'ah, soul, and then the ka'ah, the spirit, the higher aspects of what we are. So we all came from that ether state, and that's the state, as I say, which the Parnathara reside in a dimensional shift. It talks about them residing on the 9th level, or dimensional shift to the 9th ether level, and that's what we have to raise up to in terms of our transition or ascension pathway alongside the planet. Now, so let's look at true justice in some detail now. So let's do a little bit of reading. So it says, Lehe amkum ayeh mumra musbatu kharadu. For you, my beloved Sabian children, these are the rules and statutes. Yeah? So we have rules that manage the environment as opposed to laws. Now, they are interchangeable, those words, oftentimes, but if you get an understanding that we have rules that we seek to live by, and that's what governs the natural environment. So it says the natural rules of fatar nature, mima'at, true justice, 3. For all living creatures on this planet Earth, nikab taha, planet Earth. 4. All living creatures must obey the natural rules of ma'at, true justice. And there are those who are made unnatural, najamat, laws of 6 ether, unnatural fatar nature. 6. This is revealed by their very nature and actions, as well as hidden intentions, by the choice on the scale of takrurat, decisions. So this is explaining to us that, and as I was touched upon earlier in the introduction, about unnatural behaviors, and how we see that promoted even more in our society. I mean, we go back 20, 30 years or whatever, plastic surgery was certainly not the norm because it wasn't affordable. And if it was, people looked, let's be honest, they looked crazy, because when you start messing, even if we didn't have a concept of beauty or ugly, but if you start changing the maths within the person's face, it's part of that matrix, you can see, as I say, things don't add up correctly. So people that was having it looking crazy out here, but now it seems to be a situation. And then certainly when it came to black people, other than Michael Jackson, maybe the ultra kind of really rich, the average person on the street or in society wasn't doing that. Now today, it seems no one wants to be happy with what they've been naturally endowed with if the surgeon can give them the body that they want, do you understand, the nose that they want, eyes, whatever the case may be. It seems nothing is beyond us now. But that is an alteration and a shift, and characterized, as I say, by the nature of the people behind it, because their nature is to go against nature. Their nature is to create the artificial, like I say, the seedless fruit. And now we're seeing the propagation and promotion of plastic surgery. And if you speak against it, well, you shouldn't judge people, you shouldn't do this. But then we listen to all these stories of the body rejecting all this artificial stuff. I mean, it's an agenda which has been going on, which I think you can find or read more about in his story book, or refer to that class, and we go into that in some detail about what that's about this the promotion of the butt love, so to speak. Now, understand how these cycles work on the wheel of time of existence. So we're back at the SMAT circle again, just to remind ourselves and remind the newcomers of how this works. So basically, and I've not put so much pictures on, so I feel like I'm almost repeating myself, so we'll go more into what the circle is that we're looking at. So here, 72 at the side, takes 72 million years to traverse, or to go from one part of the circle to the next. Everything which is above on the top half of the circle is living. Everything on the bottom half of the circle is dead. Understood? Yeah, we take out the numbers 1 and 2, so it basically rounds up. So this is an ontological expression of how growth works within existence. So the opposite of the 9, so because 9 ether over time weakens in power. So 9 ether is ether in its youth, strength, old age, and it dies. When it dies, it becomes 6 ether. 6 ether in its youth, old age, and strength. When it dies, it becomes 3 ether or ghostational forces. So we showed you one particular life form, which was the growth of coal, and then over time, yes, coal, which is black, crumbly, understood, yeah, so less dense. Obviously, over time, millions of years, becomes a diamond, yeah, clear, transparent, yeah, no more of that energy, the inherent energy, yeah, which was from fire or burning or from the sun, is left now, and so you get this transparent, hardened, as I say, most dense crystal, so rock. So here we see that the 9 is opposite to the 3, so they are opposite in nature. Understood? This represents life, growth. This represents decay and death. So in the natural order of things, I'm dealing with race hate, but we are opposite to each other in nature. That's why we look opposite. We're calling ourselves black and white, but we're not really black. We are more brown, you understand, in various different instances, and they are transparent. Yeah, so we have color. Yeah, the most colorful people on the planet, which represents energy, and they have a lesser amount of energy as reflected in the way in which they process breathing or the breath, so on and so forth. And nothing to do with, let's say, cold weather. So it's seemingly keep being expressed. We can survive better in cold weather because of our melanin than any Caucasian on the planet. We might not like cold weather, but we'll be designed to survive better. If you put a plaster on your finger in the sand and you put it on tight enough and stop the oxygen flowing to that part, understood? And then you take that plaster off, you look at your finger and see what color it is. That tells you what you need to know about the way in which we're processing air within the environment. So we have a solar plexus and they have a lunar plexus. So we're processing the air differently. Now, different DNA has resulted in people looking different. So there's none of this same under the skin myth, yeah, which they want to promote to the world. People, we're all the same under the skin. No, we're not, because we look different. And the reason why we look different is because we have got different design. And the reason why we've got different design because different extraterrestrials were involved in manipulating or intercepting the original genome placed here by the Natharu. And it has resulted, obviously, in them creating beings after and patterned after their own genome. So therefore we have divergence within the genes and people looking different. The strongest genes on the planet are by the strongest group, which is the Natharu. Understood. So why is this necessary and why is this important? Because basically when we're dealing with these rules in nature, you have to understand the nature of things. Yes, a part of it is, well, what is it? What is that creature? And then, what is its natural incarnation? So we are designed to be opposites. Yeah, so we're not designed to do the same things, be the same, so on and so forth. Yeah, we are opposites in nature. We have to understand that. Now, when you're dealing with opposites, one of the natural rules when you're dealing with opposites is that basically the two forces cannot be of the same size, density, and occupy the same space, yeah, on this side of the circle. So whilst we are not vibrating, let's say, at a higher level, we are vibrating because we've been for many years, I suppose, operating in his image and after his likeness, the two cannot operate or occupy the same space and time on that same level of vibration. So if we're finding ourselves down here, which is the case maybe now, at this lower level, because we're patterning ourselves in his image and after our likeness, someone is going to lose out of one of those races and somebody then is going to win. So their strength means that we will get weaker. If we get stronger, they will get weaker. And maybe let me try and make that a bit clearer. Yeah, so I'm just going to switch over the screen so I can write on this pad. Just bear with me 1 second. Right, hopefully you can see my whiteboard, yeah? So, let's just see, make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, you can see my whiteboard there on the screen. So basically, because they can't, in the code of opposites, because they can't occupy the same space, if, let's say, for example, the Mukasu are at 66%, yeah, then what it means is that basically the Nagaru are going to be at 36%. If these lower in power, then so basically at the bottom is always 100%. So they are, when they're occupying, they're sharing the same space. So whatever, and it always must equal 100%. So if one gets stronger, it must mean that the other must weaken. If the other gets stronger, it must mean that the other is then weakened. Hence why, as I say, we should be occupying our own space or elevating ourselves to occupy our own space on a higher level of vibration as appropriate to our design. So this is what we must have to start to understand about this law of opposites. The reason why they want to keep us so close is because, and we'll get onto this a little bit later, is because they utilize us, obviously, as not only feeding them from an energy point of view, but we act as their scapegoats as well for the pleasures that they participate in. Because remember, another one of those laws is for as much pleasure as one participates in or enjoys, the equal amount of pain overstood, yes, must then be exhibited as well. So for every action, there is an equal or opposite reaction. Yes, understood. So just to make that a bit clear, let's go back to where we were. Any questions before I move on?
Yes, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. How many different species, genetics, do we have inside of us as Nagaru?
Yeah, good question. I think we touched upon that a bit later in the class, but there's 9 different species of Nagaru. Yeah, they're referred to it as physical ethers. Yeah, so we have, so I suppose from blue, black, understood, yeah, all the way to the sort of high yellow one may consider of the Sands people. So we have 9 different species. They refer to it in the doctrine as physical ethers. Yeah, 9 physical ethers or species. Yeah, but we touched on that a bit later. Any other questions?
Right. No, there's no further questions.
Okay, so another one of these important rules in terms of the code opposite is basically that everything, so we talked about on the top half of the circle, yes? That everything above the middle line on the circle is alive, everything below is dead. So another rule that kicks in is that everything that is living must eventually die. Understood? Yes, so everything that's living must eventually die. So the biggest thing that we can see within existence is effectively a universe, yes, and the many different types there are. So in the 9 ball parts 1 to 4, we get the size of, or the range in size of a universe. So we can see here 3 trillion miles in diameter times 6 septillion, which is 6 and 21 zeros. Yeah, that's the sort of range of a smallish universe, up to 3 trillion times 9 nonillion, understood? Miles in diameter. So tremendous in size. We obviously wrote this down in the previous class why we use words like infinity, because in this state, this is ridiculous in terms of size. But the universes are a big place. Now the universe, or our universe that we're in, so remember, as it expressed previously, universes came from dual verses, Dual verses came from triverses. Then you have multiverses, and then you say omniverse. Now, the master teacher gave us a kind of idea of what this would look like to some degree from the outside in, because we can't see it from the inside out. So if you took a bucket of water or whatever, you put some washing up liquid in it, and you excited that water and looked at all the configuration of the different bubbles, that may be more akin to what a multiverse looks like. So we're talking about balls here. In our universe, it is a liquid universe, and it's filled with a substance called ectoplasma, that type of liquid ether, understood, and it is arguably spherical in nature, understood. So, but you've obviously got different types. The point is that a universe at a certain point, because it's living, it will start to die. And so what's happening is that what you're seeing is that larger cycles of certain life forms, because we're in a universe, its decay is going to have an impact. It's going to be felt millions of years down the line. Its decay starts to have an impact on smaller life forms, obviously like ourselves, in those patterns. Same like it's going to have an impact on the sun, so on and so forth. So the sun's decay is going to have an impact, obviously, on the planets within its own solar system, so on and so forth. So this is what you're seeing here in terms of this transformational change. So 6 ether forces, for example, only came to this planet around about, the wires round it up to about 18 million years ago. Some say 17,250,000 years, but the wires ran up to 18 million, when death forces, or the force of decay, started to then come here. So we're being affected by life forms that we're within. They're going through transformation, and it's then starting to affect us, to eventually it gets to this point, understood, where basically we must transform in order to survive. We're at one of those points right now where this shift must take place. The planet itself is shifting. We also must, being aligned with the planet, must also shift in that regard as well. Understood? So, we were talking about the nature of things and as those laws pertain to certain things. So, verse 7 says, laws of those controlled by hopes, we touched upon that word, but we'll continue. Hopes of mercy and or forgiveness by unseen ghosts, spirits called deities, by those who live by faith, beliefs, and hopes out of fear of judgment. 8. Yet they are not wise enough to see that their unseen spirit deity was in fact the all-forgiving, all-merciful. Then they would not, better yet, there could not be a judgment day. 9. For all are destined to be forgiven out of his mercy or its mercy. 10. These are actual facts of blind faith were not allowed them to see or understand. 11. They have no all-forgiven, all-merciful deity, who by their very attributes could not be the master or owner of judgment day, or be forgiven mercy. What fools these mortals be. So this is expressing the fact that they're saying this God is all loving, all merciful, all forgiving, but we talk about a judgment day. So this contradiction within the monotheistic religions, the question is, why are we not able to see these issues? We're only seeing it when somebody points it out oftentimes, but now, as we start to wake up a bit more, people are starting to see them themselves. But at one time we didn't, and we just believed, we just accepted it without questioning. Understand? And we're afraid to question, because that's considered blasphemy. Or if you question too much, you're going to get kicked out of the church, synagogue, or mosque, or whatever the case may be. So all of these things needed to be challenged. One of the points is though, what does forgiveness mean? What does mercy mean? So in our rules, understood? And because what will happen is that we've seen various different incidents of this, of people exhibiting these traits or seemingly following these rules of given by these faith-based religions and applying them in situations where, is it wrong to think vengeful thoughts if somebody's done you wrong? Or is it wrong to have justice if somebody has done you something wrong? Are you supposed to forgive everybody, or are you supposed to show them mercy in a certain situations? Because it doesn't seem like we're getting that same treatment by the society that we live in. So we've had to live throughout our lives through the cancer of the disease within the human race called racism. So we've had to live with injustice and accept injustice, even to the point where if something is done to us by another race, we seem to feel the need to forgive that race or let them off the hook, so to speak. But when it's our people that do it, we want to have the opposite reaction to that. You know what I mean? Hellfire, bun them, da 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 da. You understand? Somebody's rude to you in the shop. You don't visit the shop again for the next 20 years, but you accept all manner of injustice, ill behavior, adverse behavior from other races, and accept that. When it's your own, you've got a different. Now you want to pass judgment and do things of that nature. So how are these rules supposed to work, and what do they mean in Wu-Sabat, and how should we be and apply them? So remember, Wu-Sabat is the highest state of nature because we were here first. So we're supposed to be representing those standards as a people. Now we've fallen far short of that, obviously, to once get there back again. But the question is, we have to start with, well, what does it all mean? And as I say, when we're dealing with who, what, where, why, when, how, so on and so forth, one of the things is understanding whether a thing is for or against you. So you have to understand these intricacies to know how to move in this environment. So any questions? I can see somebody hand up.
Yes, there is a question. Somebody has raised their hand. That's Sakamtat. Sakamtat, you have your hand raised. So I don't have the. I cannot see where I can.
Sorry. I need to make you.
Not free.
I've corrected that now. Sorry, you should have the ability to do that.
Okay, so Kamtat, you may ask your question. So Kamtat, your hand is raised. Would you like to ask your question?
You do have to unmute yourself, so Kamtat, if you're there. Okay, moving on then. So, any other questions? Sorry, if there's no anything else.
No further questions.
All right. Okay. So, what does mercy mean? So, you see here, mercy. Let's walk through these definitions so to make sense. Pay attention, because I have some questions for you later. It says mercy is a delay of justice until a later time. Then justice will fall upon the individual guilty one, him or herself, or upon his or her seat or kind, because each and every one of a kind is one flesh and blood, for they sprang from the same ancestral origin or tree. It should be seat, not seat, or kind. But what's that basically saying is that so mercy, or letting somebody off the hook, so to speak, it does not eliminate what is required from true justice. Understood? It just says, okay, we'll kick that basically down the road, but it still has to be offset. Understood? Now, as an individual, that mercy can be offset, but whatever you do or don't offset, it can fall upon your race. So we're all connected because, as I say, this phylogenetic tree, which we are a part of, which is unique to us and unique to various different species. Obviously, we do share certain traits and characteristics, but we have a very specific ancestral line and lineage, as our race have their own specific ancestral line and lineage as it pertains to their species. But in certain instances, we can be seen as one, or we can be seen as individuals. Understood? So mercy, delay of justice until a later time. So what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is a temporary transference or removal of guilt from the guilty one to the forgiver. However, forgiveness does not free the guilty from his or her wrongdoing, because according to the laws of nature, the guilty one must account for his or her wrongs personally, or the guilty one's seed or kind must do so. So if the individual's not going to get it, then his race must take it, if one decides or seeks to forgive. There's more to this, so let's continue. It says, moreover, listen to this closely, a person cannot forgive another person for some wrongness the culprit did to a third party. For the only one who can truly forgive is the victim himself. So the Catholic Church thing, where the person walks in and participates in confession, might be a nice thing for the person's peace of mind in their religious tradition, but it doesn't mean jack in natural nature's rules. So, who can truly forgive is the victim himself, because he or she is the one who suffered the hurt and harm. Makes sense. And the victim does not have the power of forgiveness unless he or she is in his or her right mind, and one cannot be in his or her right mind unless he or she knows and accepts and understands the right knowledge. So you can't forgive if you're seemingly under somebody else's spell, and therefore you're not making that decision in your right mind. So if you're being manipulated for forgiveness, understood, because your mind is not right, then true forgiveness then cannot work. Understood. So if a victim of domestic violence, and I say that because we seemingly show the same attributes as a race. Yeah. So we're deploying forgiveness, but we're under the control of another person's mind through fear of retribution or fear of change, so on and so forth. Then that is not true forgiveness. Forgiveness cannot be deployed in those circumstances. It says, a person has accepted the right knowledge when should be he knows the right knowledge and practices the right knowledge. Right knowledge is universal knowledge. If a person of one kind forgives a person of his own kind, he has forgiven himself, because all people of the same kind are one flesh and blood by nature and ancestral tree or origin, and justice works by seed, that is ancestral image. So this is, I think it's fairly straightforward. Yes, so basically, if you forgive somebody of your own race, for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that you must. I suppose if you decide to do that, if you forgive somebody of your own race, that neutralizes out, because you're really forgiving yourself, because we're all linked, as I say, by as individuals and kind, yeah, or kin and kind. So you're forgiving yourself because you're linked into that person. So that's how it works. It doesn't work the same way, however, if you are forgiving somebody of another race. Yes, this is why you have to kind of understand differences and how they're applied in different sets of circumstances. They're not universal across different races, because other rules and codes kick in. So let's look at justice now. It says justice is words for words and deeds for deeds, not equal to the amount sown, but equal to the amount grown. Interesting. So what does that mean? So what that is basically saying to us is it's saying that basically the person who done the wrongdoing, yes, let's say, for example, I'm trying to think about an example that's not too gruesome. But let's say, for example, I don't know, let's say, for example, somebody decided, let's say a person was cheated on. And as a result of them being cheated on, they decided to poison their partner to teach them a lesson. Yeah, so maybe they've put something in their food or some nonsense of that nature. As a result of that person them feeding food poison, they decided, look, I'm going to go out and drive the car, whatever. And as a result of them then driving the car, what happens is they then crash because they lose consciousness as a result of being sick, and they hit somebody on the road. Another driver comes along and swerves to avoid that particular incident and ends up smashing into a lamppost and then is injured as a result of that. So what this is saying is that basically justice means equal to the amount sown. So it's not just the poisoning of the individual that the person would be. Let's say the person didn't cheat. Let's say they thought they cheated and they poisoned it. Yeah, so they say they didn't cheat, but they thought they did and they poisoned it anyway. So the act, the original act, is not enough for them to just be done for the original act of poisoning. They're also then responsible for everything that followed thereafter as a result of the original wrongness. So that's why it's saying not equal to the amount sown, so the original act of poisoning, but equal to the amount grown. So everything that took place as a result of that original wrongdoing, they are justice now. It's saying no, everything now must be settled. So that individual who started the problem is going to be responsible for everything that resulted thereafter. Understood? Yeah. So that's what justice means in that regard. It then says justice is also the balance of opposites in accordance of the cycle one lives. So again, this is where, excuse me, where it's important to understand the nature of the different races. So part of that is understanding not only who we are, who designed us, and then what was their purpose in designing us. Because you can't have just, so for example, if you're designed to, I don't know, like the nature of a lion is very different to the nature of a tiger. It's very different to our nature, for example. So the justice or the rules that then applies to them are within the nature of who and what that species is within the rules and the environment. Understood? So there's not a universe. This is why there's no real such thing as good and bad, because someone's good is somebody else's bad. Someone's bad is somebody else's good. Understood? So it's accordance to the, excuse me, to the rules of how that being is and the nature of how they're supposed to be within the rules of their environment. So something wrongdoing to us might not be wrongdoing to another race, but it's wrongdoing to us. And we see this a lot, isn't it? So certain things, they say they claim that we're always playing the race card. You understand? But that impact on us is not necessarily impacting somebody else by the same way, because they're not living our experiences. Yeah? And so this is how we have to understand that we are different. It's not like a case of, kumbaya mentality, I don't see color and all of that kind of foolishness. No, nature designed us to be different colors for a certain reason. Because it's supposed to identify. At one time, it identified different characteristics. And like you see yellow and black on a creature or whatever, it's supposed to indicate, hey, they're dangerous, or they've got, well, say dangerous, but they've got a defense mechanism that is dangerous. So therefore, the colors act as a deterrent in certain things. It's giving you indication. In our case, when we're looking at certain races, that is telling you, okay, boom, there's a deficiency of power there. So if I'm of a certain color and I'm looking at somebody of a lesser color or lesser hair texture than my own, it's just saying, okay, well, that's an indication of recessive gene traits. Now, because the genes have been scrambled now for many thousands of years, it's difficult to know who's who. But there's still elements in nature that display that. Now, it's not our fault as Nagaru that nature has endowed us with certain gifts, and through the media, television, cinema, so on and so forth, they've tried to make that which is genetically inferior within the human race superior by televisual and media and fiction. And then that which is genetically superior within the human race, they've tried to make inferior by way of media, television, cinema, so on and so forth. You understand? Obviously, now things are being set straight. That also must be set straight. Yeah. So those types of injustices are a problem. So here we see eyes for eye, teeth for tooth. So some will say eye for an eye, yes. Tooth for tooth, whatever. Eye for eye, whatever the terms are. But equal to equal. No. Eyes for eye, teeth for tooth means that whatever damage was inflicted, that is, yes, that's part of the justice. But then the person who initiated the act, the aggressor, they have to get something for being the aggressor. So it's aggressor plus the damage that was caused or inflicted on the person, or the hurt and harm that was inflicted, plus you get something for being the aggressor. So it's, in order for justice to be satisfied, the punishment has to be more than what the original infliction was, because you're getting something now for doing it in the first place, for to being the actor of the action. So you're getting it for the action and for being the actor within the action. You're getting it another settlement for justice to be settled, yeah, according to, again, natural nature's laws and rules. So here we see a situation that had a lot of people like, what the, without swearing on the call. Now, I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes, so be expressive if you can do. Based on what we've spoken about, and this is a situation, if you remember, I'm gonna call the woman's name now, but I'll just explain the circumstances of what happened. So the Mukasu woman in the picture was a police officer, if I remember the case correctly, who claimed that she thought she was in her apartment, saw this black guy in the apartment, and then pulled out her gun and shot the individual and killed him. Understood? Yes? So obviously there's an outcry. It was kind of crazy. What was she doing in his apartment, so on and so forth, or whatever. Obviously she must have known, the key and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, she ended up in his apartment, shot this individual. So an innocent person has died. The guy's well-to-do, professional, so on and so forth, had a lot going for him in life, and has been taken out by this Mukasu police officer, if I remember the case correctly. And basically, so the judge obviously heard the evidence, whatever, I think she pleads, I can't remember if she pled guilty, but basically justice was given by Mukasu's Caucasian rules of justice. So the judge has said a sentence. She, whatever, gives this story that she's sorry, blah, 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 blah. And the judge in the case comes off and gives her a hug, Bible, and then the victim's brother also gives this woman a hug and decides to forgive her because of his Christian beliefs. And so this is a person who murdered his brother now, by the way, not that I'm trying to influence what the answers are. So what we need to do in the chat, or if you're on the Facebook chat, tell me why you think justice is not satisfied. So we've gone through a few of the rules, ain't gone through all of them, but if we've gone through a few of the rules, why is justice not satisfied? Or why do you think, or is justice satisfied? If you think justice is satisfied, fine, say that. If you think justice is not satisfied, then say why. So justice is satisfied. If you think it's satisfied, say why. If you think justice is not satisfied, just a few comments, you can say why. If anybody wants to put their hand up and come and express their thoughts verbally, if they don't want to type, please feel free to do so. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to do that. Don't be shy, express yourself. Thinking about this, I probably should have done a vote really, but there we go. Right, any feedback in the chat, moderators? Any feedback in the chat?
Yes, there is. There's one here that says from Zadutui, not satisfied, the victim is dead and unable to decide if forgiveness should be given. It then goes on to say, there's another contribution here. It says, justice is not satisfied because she still has eyes and teeth. Botham was killed in his home, minding his own business, just as Breonna Taylor. There's another comment here. Their aggressors are still alive, and so are their kind. Then there is third-party forgiveness here, which doesn't work in this case. Although the brother is his kin, the brother should have slit her throat, it says here, instead of hugging her. Maybe it was a good idea I didn't put the name. Maybe I need help, but more of this sits well with me. There's another contribution again that says, greetings. I'm Atefet from Michigan, and I don't agree that justice has been satisfied. An innocent life was lost, ended before its appointed time, taken away from loved ones. They were minding their business, at peace in their home, in their bed, and the person who did this crime was let off. So that's in the chat. And in the question and answer section, I have a comment, not justice at all, as you see blacks accepting again.
Okay, really thank you all for those some really great contributions there. So I would agree. So by those rules, justice is not satisfied. So the brother, I think as it was pointed out, I think it was Tahuti pointed that out. So the brother is a third party. He is not the victim himself. The victim is dead. So no forgiveness can be conveyed because forgiveness can only be issued by the victim, correct? And the victim, obviously, unfortunately, in this instance, was dead. So therefore, no forgiveness can be conveyed. So the brother, despite his religious beliefs, cannot forgive or denote third-party forgiveness, and nor can the judge. So the judge, even though she rendered down a sentence and now is trying to offset this sentence by hugging this individual, cannot, as I say, justice can't be satisfied in this regard. There are some other things that kick in, which are some new rules that we're going to teach you now as well. So basically, she killed the person, and maybe she got a lighter sentence because she was a policeman, and they have this thing where if you kill somebody with a uniform, that seems to alleviate you from or justify, I should say. Yeah, it justifies why you've taken another person's life. In the rules of nature, that doesn't mean jack. So if somebody takes their life, even in self-defense, or they kill somebody in a uniform in their justification of whatever the reasoning was, the rules still kick in. So she obviously has taken another human being's life, so therefore justice must be served in that regard. If you remember, in some of the old school doctrine, it was said that if an Anunnaki or risky and was in front of you, they would rather let you, and you was pointing a gun at them, even though they had the power to take you out, they'd rather let you kill them, and then they obviously reincarnate, than them have to kill you. Because even though that situation, those rules of death in natural nature kick in, and they get caught up in that cycle, basically going through being killed, the way the person got killed, having to potentially being reincarnating and being born as the person's mother, the father, children, or whatever, to experience all the different aspects of the impact of what you did. Now, she obviously is a Makasu, so they don't reincarnate, but in that regard, because they're trapped here at this level. But the rules of death still kick in either on her or her race. The other issue here is, which is a new one I'm going to teach you now, is that basically whether there was a racial element to it. So basically, if she killed this individual, and in her thinking, when it happened, she killed the person because they were black, basically she violates the code of the races. So what you can't do in nature's laws is basically attack or impart ill treatment on another race based upon their race, or just because of their race. So if in her thinking, when she saw the guy and she saw he's black and she shot him for that reason, she violates the code of the races. And if that is the case, she then, not only does the rules of justice have to be satisfied to her, but it then imparts on her descendants as well. So because it's a violation of the code of races and the code of rightness, there is an additional punishment as a result of that. And so therefore, it will then pass on to her descendants or her children. If she doesn't have them, then it must be satisfied by her race. So well pointed out, justice was not satisfied in this instance by the rules of natural nature. Now, remember what happens is that the reason why a lot of innocent lives get taken is because 6 ether loves nothing more than the blood of the innocent. So it basically empowers, it's empowered more when innocent die as opposed to what they may be considered to be the guilty die. And so here we see that Christianity, or Caucasianity as it's spoken in the Nine Book, and civilization, these three words in Wu-Sabat mean exactly the same thing. And when we're talking about the Bible, yeah, everybody in it is dead, correct? So no one in that book is alive. So this is the real true Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead that they talk about from ancient Egypt is not even called the Book of the Day. Book of the Dead is called the Book of the Coming Forth by Day. Understood? So so the religion is designed in itself to give up. Understood? Yes, the innocent, so they can feed the very forces of sixth ether or Zupu. Hence why the symbol here that we see is a symbol of death, isn't it? If Jesus had been taken out, according to the story, by an AK-47, then people would be wearing AK-47s around their neck. This is also symbolic of the scapegoat doctrine. So this is somebody else taking on board or seeking to take on board, or them trying to offset the pain that they are due. They want to put it on somebody else, and that's referred to as the scapegoat doctrine. Now, in the previous example as well, the interesting thing, if they were able to forgive, remember, if they were able to forgive, they wasn't in this instance. If they were able to forgive, the craziness of it is that they inherit the fate of the guilty person, if you remember. So this is why it's even more crazy. So not only is the brother sitting in that world, now he could be in a situation where he's trapped because it was so traumatic. He could be trapped here. Now, the best outcome would be that he's not trapped and was guided, understood, to be able to go through the, what they call the death doorway or whatever, or the gate between the hours of 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. That gate opens at 3 a.m. That he wasn't trapped in the situation, but it's highly plausible that he was, because he was shot in a situation of shock. He just woke up or whatever, you're chilling, somebody shoots you, you could be trapped in the trauma of that situation. So the best outcome is that he's not. But if you've got ancestors in this situation who are batting for the other side, then they're not focused on his progression. They're more worried about his attacker. So it causes confusion in the scenario. Now, because of the way in which we have been conditioned and trained in the spell, you see that we are kind of destined to do that. Because we're ill, we will jump up for them and protect them in situations where they don't, by natural justice, deserve it. So we see in this kind of mental illness or spell type behavior being exhibited here. And this comes as one of the sons of Jacob is called Gad, yeah, and Trooper. And it basically is synonymous phonetically with the word God and also the word God. Now I'm speaking in an English accent. My American colleagues or family on the call, if they say the word God or God, you understand, it sounds almost the same. Understood? Yeah, because that's what we've been conditioned to protect them. That's how the conditioning works. Yeah, we jump up in front to protect them. And there's many examples that you see of black people jumping to the defense of Caucasians or Mukasu, when the Mukasu has got more resources to defend themselves than they have. So the question is, why are you jumping in front? They can protect themselves. Incident happened this week with a certain singer who happened to be wearing an African hairstyle or whatever, and there were black people jumping into her defense because she was being accused of cultural appropriation. She can speak for herself. She's worth a few $100 million, and if she can't speak for herself, she's got people who can speak for her. So why are you feeling the need to intervene? Because they don't do it the other way around. So there's something in us or in some of us, that has to be checked. Because as soon as somebody of a different race, particularly the Mukasu race, are in some kind of problem or trouble, we feel the need to make them feel comfortable, not necessarily let them get the punishment that they're supposed to get. I think an incident happened in a YouTube video where some white rapper was speaking in Yoruba. It went viral. Again, this is nothing that happens. So a white person imitates some element of black culture, and then all of a sudden we want to put them on some kind of pedestal. You understand? Even though what they've imitated is whack, let's be honest. You understand? It's nothing near what the original is, but we put them on a pedestal. Next minute, we've made them the top of the tree for that particular music genre, while there's black struggling. You understand? Now, this particular individual, let's say, must have cited Yoruba in his tune or whatever, and then he went viral. They then go back, as they usually do, they go through your tweets and all that kind of stuff, and found that he was been attacking black women, saying derogatory things about them, this white guy, understood. And then he was interviewed by a black woman, and she took him to task over the thing. And then basically black women started to defend the white guy, saying he was mistreated in the interview. So this kind of behavior happens prevalently, and black men, you understand, black women jump into the defense of people who can quite readily defend themselves. And it's worse when a person puts on a uniform, you understand? So when they put on a uniform, it changes the person's mindset, understood? And they would commit acts that they wouldn't readily do if they wasn't wearing a uniform. Yeah, this is part of the things that we have to kind of almost revisit within ourselves and check ourselves. No one's saying to say allow injustice and wrongdoing to go on in front of our faces. But there's some things, sometimes, just keep your mouth shut. Yeah, the beings that created us gave us what? Two sides of the brain, our left and right side. They gave us two nostrils. They gave us two eyes. They gave us two ears, and they gave us one mouth. So we're supposed to think, smell, look, and listen twice as much as we speak. So there are certain things you don't need to involve ourselves in. This is part of the programming. Yeah, the GAD, God, guard syndrome. Yeah, and all of this, as I say, is designed to promote death and dead forces. Yeah, so they're strengthening, remember, because if we're at that bottom of that circle, their strengthening means us being weaker. Unless we rise ourselves to where we should be, and then our progression is not even linked to what they're doing. So what do we see here? So it is the Kakasnadu Caucasoid scapegoat. Lies of liars, religious laws of faith, not fate. It is belief, not should be tabut. That should be sabek, not taboo. Confirmation. That's a typo there. Confirmation, a religious form of obstruction in their favor at all times. For the Kakasnadu Caucasoids created their own laws and commandments. So this just us behavior, which is their sort of justice system, just us behavior breaches natural law, because there's bias in there. There's ongoing bias in the system. And it basically means that justice, as we can see in some of these examples here, is not properly settled, understood? And particularly in their instance, it relies on this scapegoat. So as expressed earlier, for as much pleasure as a person experiences, they must suffer the equal amount of pain, unless they use a scapegoat ourselves as Nagaru people and Nagarnadu Negroids to basically become that scapegoat. So we then in-house or take on the pain that they are supposed to have exhibited for the pleasure that they have displayed. Understood? Now, what happens is it just gets, because the point, they can be receiving his pleasure and receiving no pain, is it? Because in their system, they've manipulated it in a way where it just keeps working for them. Understood? Yeah? So justice is never properly settled, as you see here in this doctrine of the scapegoat. So let's walk through it. So there's one reason Caucasians do not wish to separate from us, I should say. They wish to use us as their scapegoats. When Caucasian pleasure increases to the point where it must be offset by pain and suffering, the dead urges one or more Caucasians to go looking for someone to brutalize and kill. So remember, we're talking about this in reflection and projection. The same way we can be influenced by internal ancestors, these kind of entities, just because we can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. These kind of entities and influence internally inside of us and also externally to us as well. The same way their ancestors or forces, this kind of forces, can influence their behavior to empower, as I say, 6 ether ghostational Zupu forces, which helps to make that 6 ether stronger. It says the Negro in his or her ignorance is the Caucasian's Jesus, meaning his scapegoat, and pray, and there is nothing, it should be pray, P-R-E-Y, and there is nothing effective we Ethiopians can do about it at this time, but find, study, accept, and practice 9 knowledge that we may regain our mental power necessary to liberate ourselves by whatever means. From mental power comes all powers. We Ethiopians can stop Caucasians Dracula from preying upon us by refusing to accept their false teachings and start practicing our own way of life. So effectively, we stop feeding the forces. Yeah, stop feeding the forces. Say, they have us there as that Caucasian Jesus. And even in that story, if you look spiritually, it's a delaying of their judgment. Yeah, so when they talk about this Jesus, remember Jesus saying, a person saying they're being saved, and the master would say, well, if you're being saved, the next question then is, what are you being saved for? Because the purpose of saving something is so that you can use it later. Spiritually, when the Caucasian in their story manifested God and then killed God to prove that he was greater than God, that symbolically, that crucifixion in the sand, yeah, which remember the word crucifixion is crux and fiction, is something that's difficult to understand. Yeah, crux fiction, let's say crucifixion. It delayed, or they were seeking then to delay that judgment. So delaying or moving that judgment further down the line for obviously all of the wrongdoing that they had perpetrated, for the laws to kick in. Understood? And you see it partly in, remember that Abraham story that we were talking about last week, when Isaac, when God asked, or Lord God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. Understood? And obviously when you reread it, so you're not listening to the story, when you reread it, I think his son was to be burned on an altar, or even just kill him. He was to be burned on an altar. Yeah, so gruesome death. So again, understanding the nature of who he's talking is some of the issue here. So, but basically, because he then didn't kill the son, blood still had to be spilled. Correct? So that force or offering was still necessary, or whatever power that was seeking it was still sought to be offset. And so therefore, in the story, they killed a male lamb or whatever, or a ram, isn't it? Yes? Okay. But that's the scapegoat doctrine, yeah, which obviously seeks to be employed. You see here, Pan, understood? Yeah, the flute seemed depicted as the goat, like I think it's fawn or whatever the case may be, half man, half goat. And this is talking about this scapegoat doctrine. Yeah, we see the ultimate of it here with Jesus sacrificing, or the white Jesus sacrificing himself for the sins of mankind. understood, for the sins of mankind, which is delayed judgment. Delayed judgment, not offset judgment, delayed judgment. Yeah, and see here, linked, I say Pan is linked to Sayyir, yeah, and the doctrine of Azazel, so it's one removed. And you see here, sacrificial animal, satir, may refer to demon-possessed, goat like swine, in this regard. So satir or satir, as it's as you see it spelled there, as you may see it sometimes, associated with the devil, but this is a symbolic of the scapegoat doctrine. And so you have to be mindful not only of that scapegoat doctrine, because it doesn't just protect it, people can do it, even of your own, of that as well. So when it's in operation, and so the way to defeat it, as it's expressed in there in the 9 ball. So one has to withdraw the power that is being, when a person turns round, crash. Okay. Sorry, can you hear me? I went off. I think I went off for a second. It's like crashed. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, it seems like I crashed for a second, and they want me to get this decent information out for some reason, eh? Okay, right. Okay, am I back? Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yeah, your screen's back.
Okay. Right. Okay. So we touched upon this a little bit earlier. So on to a different rule now. But so we can see here that what is called crossing the race line. So there's a violation, as I say, when somebody does an act to another race based upon race, to be crossing the race line. As you can see here, there's a violation of the codes of races as well as the code of rightness. So basically, when we're dealing with other races, you should not seek to engage in behavior that basically you wouldn't want to happen to your own race. Understood? Yeah, so you're not engaging in behavior, you're not deliberately going out there. Like, for example, in slavery times, there was a deliberate situation there to poison our genes by their males and arguably their females going in adverse circumstances and causing us to have sex with them and then producing children as a result of that union. Understand? Under circumstances of duress. So rape is a violation of natural laws in that regard, obviously for obvious reasons. And then doing it to a person just because they are black or because you want to now in-house your genes within inside that particular race, disrupt that race, that is crossing the race lines. So, now, back in the day, I don't know, obviously we've got international people on the call, but back in the day, for example, some black men didn't want to admit they like white women or whatever. So they might say something like, well, the reason why I'm going with this white woman or whatever, because of what they've done to us in slavery. Well, if the person's doing it for that reason, that would be a violation of the code. Understood? Rather than just stop the nonsense and just admit, I mean, that they like white women in the same without giving wholly good excuses. Chapter 2, the reason why I was doing it is because blah, blah, blah. You understand? Just admit that you like them and whatever, take them, whatever that looks like, and judgment from whoever you're going to get it from as part of the major decision, whole consequences of that decision. But you can see why, when we're thinking about our come up as a race, why certain things, because remember, you mixing genes with an individual, you inherit their fate. So if you sleep with a murderer, yes, then you inherit the fate of the murderer, because for a certain time, you're holding their genes inside of you. So you inherit their fate. So you can see why when we're on the come up as a people, we're trying to come back up. You can see why, as a strategy, you're trying to not break these laws or do things that are going to add additional burden to the situation. Understood? Because you're on the come up. So you can't afford to be weighted down by foolishness. So it will be a confusion. I say you can fall in love if you want to fall in love. I'm not judging in people's bedroom, but you have to think in your mind, well, if I'm now gonna, let's just say I'm gonna mate with this person of another race, let's say well, what if, 2 generations down, her granddad was doing all the raping, her granddad murdered some innocent black people, which was quite fine by their societal norms back then, but justice still has to be meted out on that individual and on his offspring. So if I've then now mixed with that individual, I've inherited that fate. And if I can't satisfy it, now the race has to inherit the fate. So it's weighing us down on the come up. It causes confusion. Now we start to see this Wu-Sabat in all its glory and detail. You see that when we said to you, the 2 strongest forces of powers in the universe are mind power and sex. You start to see all the confusion that arises with sex and why it needs to be treated with a certain level of sacredness because of the issues that it causes down the line. But now you see we live in a time where it's pure disregard for it. Do what you want mentality, do what you want culture. That would be great if there was no consequences. But there's consequences to the actions. We don't have free will. Because if you had free will, you could do what you want without any kickback. When we do things, there's consequences. And in certain instances, it does not matter if it's the first time around. If the law is breached, reactive state, those things are going to kick in. Now, as we expressed earlier, when somebody breaches the code of the races, there is a more drastic punishment system of laws because this is, say, a violation. And so, obviously, there's things in the system that are designed to eradicate or eliminate or deter people from that type of behavior. And as I said, the resultant action is then that the person's descendants must inherit the same fate as the aggressor. So, obviously, somebody in their logical mind would not really want their children to inherit the justice to be meted down on them as well as their children. And this is why it's designed to be obviously deterrent, but obviously it's happening or happens. And in the case of the Mukasu, they don't want to face their judgment, so they keep or were seeking to delay that judgment for all the wrongdoing that they did, but they can't, as I say, avoid natural justice. So even though to us, it may seem in society right now, they don't seem to be getting any. They seem to be getting away with many different things, but their judgment is coming now. It's being meted out right now by way of natural nature. So what is rightness? So rightness is the laws and the weight of general nature. The dictates of the nature of a person, place or thing, the rightness for that person, place or thing. In other words, the nature of a thing is right for it because the thing is best when it is its own nature. So as we were touching upon earlier about understanding the nature of things and even of ourselves, and not stereotypical black types put through the Mukasu media, understood their definition of blackness that they created. But who we are according to natural nature, what is our nature? We know, for example, that we're not really a violent people. We can be violent, but not really a violent people. You understand? We're not likely to tie a person, we're not going to tie a person to the back of our truck and drive them down the road because we don't like the colour of their skin. You understand? You've got to do something to us before we're taking it. Not just doing it for the fun and the perversion of it. sandwich. We've seen happen to our race many times over. So rightness is the laws of nature as it pertains to the nature of the person, so as to say. Not good and bad as you would see it, but it tied or aligned with who and what that person is, what us as okay, right. So I've messed up a slide there, so we'll have to correct those for the next session. So basically, what it's expressing is that basically when they talk about just us, so just as JUST dash us, and their system of creating their own laws, which are designed to benefit themselves. Just us is talking about them as Celtics. Yeah? So the 6 tribes of them as Celtics, understood, i.e. shown in the word VI kings, yeah, VI dash kings. So Vikings, when they say Vikings, it's VI, the Roman numerals, V is 5, I is 1, dash kings. That's what Vikings symbolically means. Yes, 6 kings or clans or kingdoms. Yeah? Celtics, when we say Celtics, that is their tribal name. So when they talk about punching them in the genes, that's why we use the word Celtics, because that's who they really are. When you look up the tribal name or the country names of the European tribes, never takes you back to who they are. Celtics is closer to who they are because it ties into the Wicca religion, spirituality, which is sitting behind that. Once you know that, then obviously you can design better solutions to offset, because what was previously invisible adverse forces is now visible by way of awareness, visible way of right knowledge, visible, and you can start now to attack or protect yourself against what was previously, say, being unknowingly perpetrated against you. So when they talk about Celtics, Celtics, and Celtics with a K, it ties back in, and we're going to talk about this more in part 2. But the beings that were brought here from Sirius, the Shaggies, yellow fur, grey eyes, which eventually mixed in with the genes, gave blue eyes, from the dog, Homo canine. You've got the red fur and green eyes, and you've got brown fur and brown eyes. Understood? Yes? So these were the 3 root extraterrestrials that were mixed in, which is why you have these various different fur colours, I keep saying hair colours, but fur colours within the race, making them really coloured, not us coloured, but making them coloured, or beings of different colours, because being mixed in with certain groups of extraterrestrials. These eventually became what we would know tribally as the Brits, the Danish, and then those ancient Brits referred to as the Saxons. So this is why in Job 9:9 you see certain star constellations mentioned. So that symbol you're seeing there is a Pleiadian symbol. Yeah, it symbolizes those 3 different groups that we touched upon earlier. Now, this is a series, I don't know if people have seen this, called Falling Skies. I haven't seen it for a long time, but I remember it is basically, it aligns with their story. There's a lot of different groups in there. It's quite an interesting one, but there's this particular individual who exhibited certain special powers or traits was wearing the Pleiadian symbol. Watch the series. But you see the symbol right there, linked right there in this fictional story. Now we are aware through Wu-Sabat of their link to the Pleiadians, and obviously George Washington, as you know, claimed to see certain visions. This is writings that he has left in his diaries, or whatever, where he claimed to see certain extraterrestrials. And there's a picture of him. This is in 18 plus 18 plus 1, 37 genes in the mitochondrial DNA, actual fact. And we can see here in the back, it's difficult to see, but you can see the ladder here going up to a flying saucer or spacecraft. Good. Yeah, so their connection, and is here on this right-hand side, you see the Pleiades star constellation in this painting. So this is something long connected, obviously, but they remember Mukasu or the Caucasians have been brainwashed, meaning to say that their brain has been washed away of the truth or the heinous acts that their race has done, where they came from, their origin, their history. They are suffering from a serious case of amnesia as far as that's concerned. We have been brain dirtied. So, and therefore, in I suppose the law of opposites to some degree, we need our brains washed to be washed of all the lies and the filth that we've been taught from day one by the Mukasu in this society, so we can re-add the right knowledge, the right wisdom, the right understanding, to right overstanding, to bring us back to that state of sound, right reasoning.
Sorry, Namabkak, yes. The sound keeps dropping in and out. I don't know if there's anything on your side, but the sound keeps dropping in and out. I don't know if there's anything you can do.
Okay, 1 second. I don't know if that's any better. Is that any better?
It's louder.
Yeah, it's louder.
It's louder. I suspect an issue again the audio with the audio stream rather than your equipment there. It does appear to me to be an internet issue rather than your.
Okay, no problem. My apologies for that. I think there is an engineer coming in next week to try and fix this issue. So it seems interesting enough when we do these things. Some forces will seek to deter us, but I'll get it corrected for the next time. So, say an engineer, I think there's an issue maybe with the router, but we'll seek to fix that for the next time. So my apologies if it's affecting your enjoyment of what we're doing here today, but I'll try and speak a bit louder. If it is a problem, just let me know again and I'll see what I can do further. I appreciate the intervention. Right, so we touched earlier about physical ethers. And so this is basically separate to ethers when we're dealing with the world of energy, and is dealing with the amount or the amount of species within a particular race, understood? So when you're dealing with ourselves, you see that we have 9 ethers, so we have 9 different species within our race. So sometimes you hear a lot of colorism talk and different things of that nature, when in actuality, all certain times, we have various different shades within our race. Understood? And this is by design, and this is known as physical ethers, because we came from 9 beings. Understood? 9 etheric entities that were patterned, and so therefore, this is reflected in the amount of species, as I say, that we have. Now, when we're looking at the Caucasian race, so to speak, or the Mukasu race, let me just 1 second. Yeah, when we're looking at the Mukasu race, we see here 6 ether, and we see here red and white seeds, and then we see here 5 ether. So the females obviously are able to vibrate up to the 6 ether range. The males only up to the 5 ether range. Now, slightly different with this group here is that they still come from 6 genetic pools or DNA pools for their race, but but then you have different classifications. So because the males are 5 and then the females are 6, that then gives you 11, and that's symbolic of the 11 sons of Canaan, as mentioned, or Canaan obviously being birthed, isn't it, in Genesis 9:25, and then obviously they talk about his tribe and his children or whatever in Genesis chapter 10. And if you remember on one of the old school videos with the master teacher, he said, the 11 sons of Canaan, that is symbolic of 11 different graftation projects of the white race. Understood? So when you're looking at this is simply talking about they come from 6 sets of gene pools, but the males have 5 species and the 6 have 6 species which they're finding, and they'll find that it all comes from 6 sets or 6 DNA pools. There's 6 sets of genealogy here. Now, I want to get to the end, so we've only got about 10 minutes left. So let me just move through this a bit quickly. So what we're seeing here in his story, we see, as opposed to the feminine, the fem6, and you see the 6 different gene pools that they're starting now to find, understood, of where they're coming from. And now the artist depictions of what they're saying these individuals look like or what they look like or whatever, you know, you need to, when you do anything with the Mukasa, you need to take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not saying they're not true or thing, but you need to take them with a pinch of salt. You understand? What you tend to find is that the ones which are older, they make more simian looking, yes, and then the ones which are more modern, they kind of make them a bit more humanoid looking, and this is what they decide to depict. The interesting thing about it is, okay, if you're that depiction of all these individuals with their straight fur, yeah, then the question is, well, where did curly hair come from? Because in all your depictions, they've got fur inside of beards, and yeah, in these various different depictions. If you go older, you see similar that type of thing. Yeah, hair on the face, so on and so forth. When you think about certain African tribes, they don't even have hair on their arms, and they don't have hair on their face. Yeah, the older we get, the oldest tribe, they don't have hair on their face. They don't have facial hair. Facial hair has come through, or facial fur has come through mixing. So this can't be the beginning of things by way of their explanation if you're seeing pure fur and we're not seeing hair, which is genetically stronger than fur. Understood? So this is what just us, going back to what we're talking about today, this is what just us is referring to, yeah? And it's an animalistic trait for them to look out for people that look like them. It's a lower mindset, a lower way of thinking, lower intelligence. Obviously, we're doing it because we're on the come up. Yeah, so it's a necessary thing that we have to do. But obviously, when we were in our supreme mind, we were helping all types of people on the planet to maintain the order of the planet. So depending on what their nature was, then we tailored our teachings or information that we was giving them according to their nature. Understood? So many came to us for assistance, to be civilized. We civilized many people. We were never civilized, excuse me, but we were civilizers. We had to keep people in order with the rules of natural nature and put systems in place to maintain that. We helped many people across the planet. Understood? We didn't manipulate or introduce a process of wrong racism where we're going to use your race to further our own race, yeah, as ancient Muhammadu, yeah, as ancient Egyptians, ancient Africans. We knew we had our own power. We didn't need to rely on anybody else. We had the power we need from natural nature, not from manipulating and tricking others to maintain our civilization or our liberty in civilization. So 6 ether is fem, 6 for them. Let's say 5 ether. That's where you get your 11 tribes from symbolically. And the Bible is the representation of his story, as well as the Book of Mormon, the Torah, so on and so forth. It's got nothing to do with us. We were here millions of years before this took place. So all of this judgment that they was delaying, all this wickedness that they was been perpetrating on the planet Earth for the last 6,000 years. And remember, their overlords, the Pleiadians, gave them dominion over the planet, isn't it? To name animals, various different things. They're Adam, yeah, gave them dominion over the thing, and what have they done with their time? So as it's expressed in here, it's from Dimensional Shift, in 1999, their overlords came and said, well, what you been doing this last 6,000 years? Why, when you had the option to, didn't you rule with peace? Now, I'm not saying that these Pleiadians were nice individuals. The nature of them is in the Mukasu. So some of the behaviors that the Mukasu was going on with, they get it from their overlords. But they did try to give them rules and things to live by, to keep them in check. Yes, but they did not want to adhere to them. So they were asked a direct question, seeking a further extension, because as you are aware, their telomeres, or the telomerase, which governs the race, telomeres cover the individual, and so these are tips of the chromosomes, which basically tell you how many times cells within the body are going to regenerate. So if you analyze, I suppose, the telomeres, you can tell how long a person is going to live for, bar any accident or ill situation that comes to them. And if naturally occurring, it can tell you how many times it's going to regenerate. Now, the telomerase does that for the race. So they had a time limit on their telomerase, or on their species, expiry of 6,000 years. So certain questions they was asked, they didn't have the answers for. And one of the issues was them abusing us as Nagaru. Yes, so on the children of the Natharu, obviously with the highest ruling group, and why they sought to use their power or to abuse us. So remember, there's payback for this in the justice system. So their overlords decided, well, we ain't going to be party to any of that, so they abandoned them. Understood? But as part of that abandonment, they had placed a self-destruction mechanism in the genes, understood, which basically was triggered by 3 words: Abaddon, Apollyon, and the third word was Abudin. Now, the person who triggered the first 2 words of this was George Bush Sr., understood? Yes? And he did that in 2001. And so basically, these triggered, and then Osama, as it's showing there, triggered the Abudin. So this affected a self-destruction mechanism in their genealogy, where in order for that justice to be served correctly for all of the madness that they have done for the last 6,000 years, the only way for that justice to be satisfied is for them to be eradicated. Yeah, so no, the greater people than us, the Pleiadians are significantly powerful individuals with vast experience, well over than something that we as Nagaru living on Earth have access to. So if they couldn't reform them, then why are we trying? I mean, well, they created them. If they can't reform them, you understand their behaviors, then what can we do about it? So that judgment was set down upon then. And basically, you find those words as shown here on this slide in Revelations 9:11, and then we see a incident which also happened on 9/11. Now, Bush, as we can see here in the Strong's Concordance, excuse me, it means to be ashamed, to put to shame, to be ashamed, disconcerted, disappointed, to feel shame, shame to act shamefully, which obviously ties in to this judgment, understood? Yes, which was to befall these individuals, which, remember, those 2 play an important role. He's the big dragon or dragonian, and his son is known as the little dragon. Yeah, of the Skull and Bones out of Yale University, and we see there the symbol, isn't it, 322 of the Skull and Bones, and that is tied into Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. As you can see there, now man has become like one of us to know good and evil. Understood, because they know that obviously if Christians like to say, well, God is all good, but then man became like God, according to the story, doing a negative act, correct? So, yeah, man, he didn't become like God doing a good act. He become like God when he lied, he cheated, understood, yeah, deceived. So now the man has become like one of us, to know good from evil. So that's what that's tying into, if you know who's there, manipulating the circumstances according to the story. So that's who they're aligning themselves with and what it ties into. Again, we talk about Bible, Quran, and the Torah. This is his story. It's a Caucasian story. This is not the start of the Nagaru story here. So this trigger was hitting, and it's part of, say, the dimensional shift. So their elimination, as we see what's happening now with the coronavirus, and how we've had several different viruses, which we know is an extraterrestrial agenda, which has been attacking certain types of genes, understood, that made up, not what we made up, but what made up the Mukasu, or the Caucasian, understood. Obviously, DUF 1220, we understand is a designer gene, and that was part Homo simian, part Pleiadian, and part Anunnaki in the designer gene. But coupled with that, remember, the Homo porcine was used, which is the swine, the Homo simian, as we just mentioned, and the Homo canine was used. And if you track back to the various different viruses, we've touched upon this in a previous class, touch upon about these different viruses. They've obviously been designed to attack a certain type of species with those genes: swine flu, simian, flu in terms of HIV. So we've had these viruses that are attacking a certain people, or taking out a certain people. Obviously, what we have to be concerned about and mindful of is that one of the ways to defeat the virus is the plasma in our blood. Understood? And so, therefore, if we're not careful, or we're not powerful in terms of our coming together and unifying, then we can become susceptible, as I say, to being exploited by those at this particular time who have more power than us. So us being in and around them makes us vulnerable and susceptible, because there's not much you can do when rules and laws change in order to get food or money or certain things for survival. You have to comply and conform with that, as much as people talk about, I'm never taking this, I'm never taking that, I'm never taking the chip, I'm never doing this. Do you understand? Well, see what I mean? They can manipulate situations that force you to take it. And obviously, if you haven't got the money, or you're not able to travel or move or relocate or whatever, in terms of us coming together, then we're not able to defeat those. Hence why you see the urgency of what's required in this day and time, and why you can see they sought to take out, when they saw this black man coming together and building this Egyptian city and putting houses there and talking about us being self-sufficient or whatever and preparing. Yeah, they said, well, we got to stop that, because what's coming down the line in the future? Yeah, that would have been a serious solution in that day and time, or a marker to say, okay, well, this is how we do it in this place. Now let's replicate that in various different places around the world for our survival. Now we're behind time. Still with the master incarcerated, and everything that's happened thus far with this virus, he has said ahead of time. So it's not like our ancestors are not there seeking to provide the information and warn us. It's just, where is our focus right now? Because these things are happening in and around us, regardless of whether we acknowledge them happening or not. It's just as Sabians and those who at least follow Wu-Sabat understood, you're in at the forefront to have the knowledge of what is going on. You understand? Your average preacher or your imam or your you understand, your priest is not giving you that information. It's not tailored for the day and time that we're in. Your Kohen, I should say, that was what I was looking for. You're not looking out for you for the day and time we're in, not giving you the detailed knowledge for the day and time we're in. Understood? So this is a tailored solution, which is why, as I say, we have to separate ourselves, as you know, spiritually from what they are doing and start to become and do our own stuff. In a sense, speaking the language, learn the doctrine, understood, obviously coming together economically, so on and so forth. The spiritual science is designed to unify our minds for that purpose, because you see now what is really at stake. So, just a couple more slides and let me close that thing out for today. So this phylogenetic tree, or they say phylogeny, but phylogenetic tree is just showing you, as I say, that there's obviously they've got a classification system, but it's to show you that, as I say, there is independence between different species. So what obviously is happening is they are tracking, or what you can do is you can track. So our phylogenetic tree obviously would be from the point of being placed in the waters, obviously as a germinated seed, going to single cell amoebas to protozoas, so on and so forth, tracking all of that growth journey all the way up until where we are today. And then prior to that, it's how we were then connected to the beings that place that seed in the water. So how we're connected then to the Natharu, understood, who has obviously put their genes within that original seed. And we understand, for example, that originally came, that craft originally came, or those genes came from the Sirius star constellation, but the craft that brought them here came from Orion, an egg-shaped craft that housed our original cells inside of the dolphin, which has 44 chromosomes. The dolphin was placed in the waters in and around the Indian Ocean, understood, defecated in the waters, and obviously that allowed then those genes to evolve. And then we came up out on the continent of what is today known as Antarctica, but Antarctica was not a ice-aged continent at that time. Obviously, it was fertile ground and land, and we migrated to various other places, which we may cover in more detail in part 2, just to look at that migration journey. So the phylogenetic tree is important because, as I say, it keeps a certain separation. You have to understand why, as I say, you have a certain type of doctrine that applies for you and your nature, that is tailored for you and your nature, and then maintains communication between you, your Salafu, and the Parnatharu. So your etheric line and your genetic line are all interconnected, and they don't fuse together with other races. So we are vibrating on our own frequency, understood, like a radio station. Wu-Sabat has a frequency, understood, which we're seeking to connect to and vibrate on, which again we'll go into more in part 2. Other races have their own frequency, but it doesn't vibrate up the scale as high as ours. Yes, but many, as I say, are constantly seeking, if not to block those frequencies, but to block those frequencies is to divert our emotional energy to feed them and keep us, as I say, as their scapegoats. And if you think about it, you look at some of those Egyptian prayer positions now. If you look at those Egyptian prayer positions, you look at the one with the hands up, for example, you can see us sending out information as well as receiving. Yeah, because you feel that you start to engage, or you're aligning those energy points within the body, you can start to feel, so you've got a little kind of energy point in the palm of your hands, understood? And energy disseminates from there. So even in our prayer system, remember, we were converting light energy and turning it into tachyonic energy, the glue that holds everything together. So we are supreme beings, understood, living as men and women, understood. And so all of this outformation coming to you in the form of information is designed to bring awareness to who you are, so that you can start to do the necessary things to cultivate yourself to become supreme again and save not only yourself, not only your family, but to save our race and our ancestors who are trapped, as I say, in those lower realms from 1 to 6 ether. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop here, and then we'll continue this next month. So we'll just close out with a little stuff about some of those hominids, and then we'll go into some of the 9 doctrines of Tahuti's and look at those natural laws and how we should be utilizing or better understanding them. And then we'll look at some of the maxims of Yaanuwn as well. And if we get time, we'll look at the migration of us as well. So the migration the migration events of how we've ended up in various different places around the world. We'll look at that in some detail as well. So we're back again. Sorry, before I do that, any questions, any burning questions before we close out?
Yes, there's actually 2 comments here referring to the pictures that you showed earlier in the courtroom with the judge hugging the policewoman and the brother. And one question, so I'll just quickly go through the 2 comments. The first one is from Anonymous. The victim is dead, but in the case of the ones who are left, the effect of the crime, are left with the effect of the crime, are having to pick up the pieces. So should that not be the person or people to express how they feel for the crime that was committed? ? And then the second.
Let me deal with that first.
All right.
So yeah, I suppose it's a fair point, but the individual is not. They are dead, but the energy of the individual is still there. Energy can't be destroyed. It can change in polarity. So the individual is still around. It's not like they're not there. Remember, when you kill somebody, the person who you killed, their spirit attaches to the individual who killed them. And so that individual may be, even in that instance, seeking to take out their own justice against a person by trying to, and this is what happens, is you see it happen to a lot of soldiers and soldiers come back from war situations, because the spirit of the person, many people they may have killed in battle, for example, attaches to the person, and they're trying to make the person commit suicide, send them mentally ill, don't let them get no sleep, all this type of thing. So that's one of the things that can happen when a person gets killed. So this individual is still attached to that person. It's just that by the rules of natural nature, forgiveness, remember, is inherent in the fate of that individual person, and only the victim can deploy that, and only the victim in their right mind can deploy that, not a manipulated mind. So what works in society is very different to what the rules of nature work, insofar as wherever they may feel to comfort the person or whatever the case may be. It's really only for their own. Let's be honest. If not to be too savage, those individuals concerned, is it about their brother or is it about their personal emotions? So it's about how they feel about the situation. So it's more of a selfish act for their own peace of mind and feeling about the situation. So basically, so they feel that sense of peace. They're doing what they believe is that the right act. It's got nothing to do with justice for their, for their lost loved one. It's about their personal scenario or situation. And you know what? If the judge hugs every victim, if the judge hugs every perpetrator, that comes into court, then that's what the judge does. But I bet the judge does not hug every victim, every perpetrator, that comes into a court. So, as I say, there's an issue there with what was taking place, and they readily were happy to show that around the world. Other races must be looking at that like, what's wrong with these people? You understand? It's like we're not comfortable to even receive justice. We become so used to not receiving justice, we become so used to being the victim, that when justice comes, it's like we're not comfortable to see the person get what was coming to them. Understood? And the mentality of Panatharu, just to bring that into the equation, Parnatharu do not forgive, neither do they forget. Let me say that again. Parnatharu do not forgive, and they do not forget. Next question.
There's a comment here from Aha, and it says, justice and solstice are saying similar meaning. That is that there is a standstill of a thing. So they show us that getting just treatment in their court is like frozen ice, or at a standstill, like the sun appearing to stand still along its elliptical movement. I can explain this verbally if necessary.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't see it like that, but yeah, interesting comments. Yeah, about the delay. Well, justice. Remember, justice is not delay, but obviously the response to justice seeks to try and delay it, but it must be, as I say, satisfied. Maybe we know the rules a bit better, and that's good that we're thinking like that outside of the box to know how it should be deployed. You understand? Because this is one of the keys. Is knowing the rules can't be changed. You understand? So we have to know them well enough to know how to work within them. You understand? And this is part of our, as we're coming into greater awareness of what is going on in our environment, as well as ourselves. Yeah, there's ourselves to look at, and there's also our environment to be cognizant of. Anything else?
And the final question here from Aha. From what is said so far, is it true we cannot get just treatment from the opposite race?
That's a great point. Well, I think you've got to look at it like this, isn't it? I think in the early part of this class, as the Ashram was expressing, saying, well, you're going to look at it, isn't it, by observing the nature of the individual. So you're looking at their actions, you're looking at their behavior. I mean, time and time again, the thing what happens with us is that, and the way we've been programmed, the master expresses, because he's saying that when it's with them, when they do something, it doesn't form a pattern of behavior. So, for example, there'll be a serial killer who is in a good job, yes, who plays the model citizen, for example, and has killed 20 people. Now, that narrative or story can be put against a lot of serial killers. But what happens is that they never allow you to form and say, okay, well, that guy with the glasses, whatever, boom, 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 he looks like a serial killer. Or that da-da-da-da-da, because they looks like a paedophile, or whatever the case would be. They don't allow it to form the pattern of behavior as I suppose, a warning mechanism or whatever. Whenever some crime happens, which they're guilty of, which is heinous or seemingly evil, what we get is, what happened in the person's childhood? You know what I mean? They had bad parents, da-da-da-da. We get a whole explanation, 2-3 days of explanation. Boom, 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 going to how the person turned, this, that, or whatever, explaining, because they don't want us to feel like, oh, that's their nature. But when it's us or other races, they don't get none of that. They don't get none of that explanation. They were evil to the core, evil by nature, whatever. And then they do allow those stereotypes or monotypes, well, it's not stereotype, it's two, but they allow those monotypes to form, understood? Where now this is the problem that we're facing, isn't it? Because the programming that has happened through movies, society, so on and so forth, seemingly this is being blamed for some of the fear-based behavior that's going on right now. But it's what we know in terms of their nature, many derive pleasure from executing heinous acts against their race. You understand? Now, in the rules of nature, if somebody does something to you, you're supposed to do something back with either equal or greater force. The problem, what we find for ourselves now, is that we're not in a position of strength to be able to do that. So not being in right mind and having the right kind of power behind us, it will be suicide to go against certain aggressors and transgressors. And that's what they want us to do, because innocent blood, as we say, empowers those forces. This is why the Master was saying, as a people, we're spiritually weak, and why it was necessary for us to start to now indulge in all aspects, I suppose, of what is considered to be positive thinking, prayer, meditation, drinking enough water, proper amount of sleep, you understand? And reconnecting with your ancestral power, your great-grandmother who passed, or your great-grandfather who passed, because basically nothing can't defeat nature. No technology on this planet that can deal with this virus. It's taking people out. And so one of the greatest gifts, one of the greatest gifts, or many gifts given, and the language to connect us in tones to natural nature and our higher ancestors. But it was the fact of you giving you the various different rituals, with the candle, the altar, so on and so forth, to connect, because basically everybody else is connecting with their ancestors. You know, you think that they joke about it with the guys at Bohemian Grove, always praying to the big owl, but they're in their spirituality, calling upon whatever they need to keep what they want to do going. So it needs to be countered. And if we're not even asking for the help, or we're not empowering ourselves to then exhibit the power, then what's going to happen? We explained this the last time. Master Secrets number 1, it explains to you, you're not in this situation for what you have done, but rather you are in this situation for what you have failed to do. Somebody does something to you, most of a different race in Zahina Sat, we don't get on our hands and knees and lick down somebody's prayers and do. Let's be honest, we don't do it. It's like, no, ciao. Let me leave that. So now you're holding all the problem now. You're holding all the problem. Instead of you to remember the person's face, hey, Granny, please help me out here. Kimanta, help me out here, please. You saw what was happening to me. This day, every time I go into the supermarket, person's following me around, is creating stress for me. Can you deal with them? Deal with something about it. You've read the the Gold Book, Sacred Records of Tamaray. When you drop an 18 in there and you listen to what's being asked for in terms of justice, it doesn't even pale to what we're asking for. It's telling you, this person's done me wrong. Take out them and their whole bloodline. Wipe them out of existence. That's our prayer. When people mess with our race or mess with us unjustly. It's not about the kind of emotions. This is why we have to get back into the mindset of our ancestors, because they didn't play. And that's how they were able to maintain their dominance, by maintaining what was theirs. Doesn't mean they didn't help people. Doesn't mean they wasn't compassionate or whatever the case may be. But if you mess with them, you understand, they got theirs. And it wasn't always with fighting either. It was like, okay, you want to drop that, let's use nature. Let's drop a disease. You know what I mean? Let's drop a thing that they can't see. Yeah, we have to get back to that power. What took out the Titanic, for them disrespecting by moving the body of Princess Amun-Ra or Raye away from where she was. Then look what happens. Nature that came that way. That's what we need to get back to. You understand? We're not going to defeat them at the moment with the things that they want to use. Guns, tanks, so on and so forth. You understand? But we are going to defeat them if we align ourselves spiritually with the help that is on them. Not only just at the end of our own arm, but if we use that arm to, you know what I mean? And the hand that's on the end of it to light the candle, say the right rituals, understood, and connect with our ancestors and make those requests accordingly to initiate our protection. If we don't do it, then you understand, at the end of the day, you haven't dialed the number, you've not done the actions necessary to aid your protection. They do what they can, but you've got to make the request. You are both etheric and you are physical, and you must make the request. That's the day and time we're in. And you won't know it until you put it into practice. You understand? That's one of the things we'll cover next week. All this knowledge is great, but it has a practical application that must also feature in what we do. And I think we've touched upon it a little bit today. You understand? So not just reading and learning, there must be practical application as well. Anything else?
Yeah, there's a question here from Adorna. When the chip becomes compulsory, what do we do as a race?
I mean, that's a difficult question, really. It depends on the context and where you are and how it's being delivered. I think it's great that you said as a race, because if a first generation had to take it, then you would want to plan to say that the next generation wouldn't have to take it. So it depends where we find ourselves in such circumstances. Obviously, if you're on your own land, in your own environment, and you're living off nature, you stand a better chance of not having to rely on that system. If you're caught up and, as I say, you need whatever, as they put all these things in the way where you need money to survive or money to do something, you can't access your funds unless you've got certain whatever protection, so on and so forth, as we see with the reduction of cash at the moment for certain services, then you're going to be then you may be subject to having to take that. You understand? Obviously, you'd have to take whatever relevant precautions, but you'd have to have a plan. You'd have to have a plan collectively to work through those issues. So, sometimes when we're dealing with these things, obviously we have to think short term, medium, and long term. The longer term thinking is that basically it's going to take at least 400, because we're the first check. We're seeing the change happening now, isn't it? The interception with the right kind of knowledge, very different to maybe some of our foremothers and forefathers. So that information was coming at the end of the moon cycle at 1970. So we're now getting the proper information now to make the transformational change, and therefore it will take at least 4 generations for that change to come into full effect, because the genes shift every 4 generations. So all of the Makasu influence and poison the genes is not going to come out for a further 4 generations. So if you think in that regard long term, and you're thinking about the children and the children's children, so on and so forth. So we want to avoid it if we can avoid it, but if some people have to take the chip, then as long as it's part of a plan, a greater plan for survival, then it is what it is, I think. You know what I mean? Unless it's unless it's going to kill you immediately or whatever the case may be, then there's a lot of other things we put in ourselves over the years. I mean, you say chip, but then if you drinking cans of KA, you know what I mean, for the last 20 years, you've been putting metal in your system anyway. You see what I'm saying? So you've always got to be smart on how you're thinking, and if you're willing to do what's necessary so that obviously when we die, we've got the right things in place, then you don't need to fear that side of things. On the short-term level, are we working towards getting certain things economically so we don't have to be subject to that? Then those are things that we have to think smarter and commit to that. And as I say, if we've got a long-term vision and we know we're working to that, then whatever sacrifices we have to make, at least we know there's a plan in place. You'd rather not die and know there's no plan in place for any sacrifices that we have to make. And remember, life is precious. So until we have to give up that last breath, we're going to hold on to it. At the same time, we're not going to have a fear for what's going on, especially if we align ourselves not only with our own ancestors, but make sure we get the master teacher free, and so that we are steps ahead of the game and know the plan clearly of what our ancestors have for us to avoid the calamities that are to befall the Makasu, who will be eliminated by 2060. Any other questions?
No further questions.
Okay, so a very interesting part 2 that we're going to have. So thank you for everybody for your contributions. Been a very good interactive session today, and I'll continue In the same vein, in 2 weeks' time, so that's the 20th of September. So I say if you want to join us on the Zoom platform, then follow those links. We also obviously got a YouTube channel. That if you search All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands on the North on YouTube, you can find various different videos here. So if you join for the first time and want to see what we've done previously, you can tap in to that, and there's links, as I say, for the UK-based website and also for the worldwide website for Wu-Sabat as well, if you want to find out about joining or information of that nature. Okay, Tawakkum says thank you all, everybody, for your time today. Much appreciated. Convey thanks to the facilitators for helping with the calls today. And we will see you on the 20th of September for part 2 of this class. And if you want more information on what we're speaking about today, then Mimat is the Master's Secret that we've been doing today, True Justice, and we've also covered aspects of right knowledge, breaking the spell, and the 9-ball series from part 1, if you want to do more research into that. Okay, Tawakkum, take care all, and we'll see you next time. Wadu.